There is a particular kind of silence that falls over the world at around 2 in the morning. The streets go quiet, the birds stop. Even the wind seems to pull back, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. And in that silence, people sleep. Or at least, that is what we tell ourselves. That sleep is natural, inevitable. A long, unbroken tide that carries us from dusk to dawn and deposits us, slightly confused and warm, on the shore of a new morning. But that idea, the one you grew up with, the one your parents taught you and their parents taught them, is not ancient. It is not even old. It is, by the long measure of human history, almost embarrassingly new. Because for most of the time that human beings have walked this earth, built their fires, named their children, buried their dead, and looked up at the same stars you can see tonight, almost no one slept the way you think you are supposed to sleep. They did not sleep in one long stretch. They did not wake and feel broken. They did not stumble toward coffee or reach for a phone. They woke in the deep middle of the night deliberately, purposefully, as if they had an appointment with the darkness. And in many ways, they did. Welcome. If you are watching this at 2 in the morning or 3, if your mind is too loud and the ceiling is too close, if you have given up on sleep and surrendered to the blue glow of a screen, then you are about to discover something that might change how you think about what you are doing right now. You are not broken. You are not suffering from insomnia. You might simply be remembering something that your body never forgot, even if your conscious mind did. Before we dive in, I want to say something to whoever is watching this. Whether you found this video on purpose or stumbled onto it in a half-asleep scroll, I make these videos for you, for the quiet hours, for the minds that need somewhere gentle to rest. If you are watching this to fall asleep, that is exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe and let me know where you are right now and what time is it. Now, let us begin, not with a textbook, not with a chart. Let us begin with a man, a very specific man, in a very specific moment, in a city that no longer exists in the way it once did. And let us call him by the name his mother used when she called him in from the fields as a boy. Let us call him Hamid. Hamid lives in the city of Baghdad. The year is somewhere around 900 CE. The Abbasid Caliphate is at the height of its power, and Baghdad is, without question, the most magnificent city on earth. It is a city of more than 1 million people, which is almost incomprehensible for the 9th century, a century when most of Europe's largest cities barely hold 50,000 souls. Baghdad has libraries that dwarf anything the Western world can imagine. It has hospitals where physicians practice medicine that will not be rediscovered in Europe for another 500 years. It has gardens and canals and a round city design that engineers still study. It has a house of wisdom where scholars from every corner of the known world translate, argue, calculate, and dream. And Hamid, who is not one of the great scholars but one of the city's bakers, wakes up. He wakes not because he is startled, not because a child is crying. He wakes because his body tells him it is time. The darkness outside his small window is complete, but it is a different kind of darkness than the darkness of early evening. It is the darkness of deep night, the second half. The part of night that belongs to something other than feasting and story and the slow unwinding of the day. He lies there for a moment. His wife is awake too. This is not unusual. This is not a problem. They talk, quietly, the way people talk when the world has gone small and soft around them. They talk about nothing important and everything important. The way couples do when there is no audience, no task, no urgency. Just two people in the dark, existing together. After a while, Hamid gets up. He does not light a lamp yet. He sits in the darkness and he prays. This is the hour of Tahajjud, the voluntary night prayer, and his city is full of people doing exactly the same thing. Across the rooftops of Baghdad, in 10,000 homes, people are awake. Some are praying, some are writing, some are simply sitting with the particular quality of thought that seems only available in this strange middle hour when the brain is soft and the usual barriers between the self and whatever lies beneath the self go thin. He will sleep again in an hour, maybe 2. And when the call to Fajr prayer sounds from the minarets as the sky begins its slow turn from black to deep blue, he will already have been awake for a while. The night will not have been broken for him. It will have simply had a different shape than you expect. This is the first sleep and the second sleep. And it was, for most of human history, not an anomaly. It was the design. The historian Roger Ekirk spent 16 years collecting references to this pattern of sleep from historical documents across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas. He found hundreds of them: diary entries, court records, medical texts, literary references, all describing, in completely matter-of-fact terms, what they called the first sleep and the second sleep. The waking period in between was called, variously, the watch, the dorveille, the watching, the quiet. It was not described with alarm. It was described the way you might describe making tea in the morning, as simply what one did. In medieval Europe, physicians actually prescribed activities for this waking period. A doctor writing in the 15th century advised that the time between first and second sleep was ideal for study, prayer, and sexual activity, in that order, which tells you a great deal about medieval priorities. The waking period was not considered an interruption of sleep. It was considered a part of the night that had its own purpose, its own texture, its own gifts. But Hamid does not know any of this as history. He does not know he is practicing something ancient. He just knows that the night has a shape, and he is moving through it the way his father did, and his father's father before that. And in the city around him, that great humming, impossible city on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, thousands of other people are moving through the same shape. Bakers like him, who will need to be at work before the sun clears the horizon. Scholars in the House of Wisdom who find that the deep middle of the night produces a particular kind of clarity. Guards walking their slow circuits around the city walls, mothers feeding infants, old men who have given up pretending they can sleep straight through and have made their peace with the dark. Let us stay in Baghdad for a while longer, because this city is worth staying in. There is something about it that the modern mind struggles to contain. When you say the word Baghdad today, certain images arrive before you can stop them. Images of conflict, of rubble, of a complicated and painful present. But the Baghdad of the 9th and 10th centuries was something so different, so astonishing, that to describe it accurately sounds almost like describing a place from fiction. The Abbasid Caliphate built the city in a perfect circle, not approximately circular, not sort of round. The city was designed from the ground up as a geometric ideal, with the Great Mosque and the Caliph's palace at its center, surrounded by concentric rings of streets and neighborhoods and markets. It was called Madinat al-Salam, the City of Peace, and it was built in an era when the Islamic world was doing something that no civilization before it had done on quite the same scale, systematically gathering and preserving the knowledge of every other civilization it encountered. The House of Wisdom, the Bait al-Hikmah, was not a library in the sense we usually mean. It was more like a living engine of intellectual production. Scholars there were translating Aristotle, Plato, Galen, Ptolemy, and dozens of other Greek thinkers into Arabic. They were translating Persian astronomical texts, Indian mathematical treatises, Syriac Christian philosophy, and they were not merely translating, they were improving, arguing, correcting, building on what they found. The mathematics of algebra was born there, in that building, in that city, during this period. The systematic study of optics, advances in astronomy that would not be replicated in Europe for centuries. And it was, from roughly 762, when it was founded, to the catastrophe of 1258, a city that grew to hold perhaps 1.5 million people, which is, to put it in perspective, approximately the population of Philadelphia today. In the 9th century, in a desert, how do you feed 1.5 million people in a desert? You build canals, enormous, sophisticated networks of irrigation that bring water from the Tigris and Euphrates into fields for miles around the city. You develop agricultural science. You plant orchards and kitchen gardens and fields of grain. You create a merchant class so efficient that goods flow into Baghdad from as far as China and as far as Spain simultaneously. Silk and spice, moving east to west. Gold and grain, moving west to east. And Baghdad sitting at the center of that web, taking a little of everything, growing fat and brilliant and proud on the surplus of a world that was, for a time, moving through it. At night, Hamid the baker sleeps, his first sleep, while the city hums around him. While a scholar named Al-Kindi, who some will later call the first Arab philosopher, sits in his study and works through the small hours on a treatise about music and mathematics and the nature of light. While the caliph's astronomers calibrate their instruments on a rooftop observatory and peer at stars they are naming for the first time in Arabic, names that will travel across centuries and land in our own astronomy textbooks. Aldebaran, Vega, Betelgeuse. And when Hamid wakes at the midpoint of the night, somewhere in the city, someone is doing the same, and they are not afraid of the dark, and they are not broken. And the night, with its middle waking and its second sleep, is simply what a night is. This is important. Hold on to this, because part of what made the disappearance of this sleep pattern so complete, so total, is that when it disappeared, it took the memory of itself with it. We forgot that we ever slept this way. We forgot so thoroughly that when people began reporting the experience in modern times, waking in the middle of the night and feeling not panicked but calm and somehow clear, they were told they had a sleep disorder. They were prescribed medication. They were sent to sleep clinics. They were told to fix something that was not broken. But let us not rush ahead. Let us move through the night slowly, the way a night deserves to be moved through. Because there are other cities to visit, other people waking in the dark, other fires burning in the middle of the night, in places that most of us will never see, in times we can barely imagine. Let us go back further, much further. Let us go back to a place in the Indus Valley, to a city called Mohenjo-Daro, which flourished somewhere between 2500 and 1900 BCE. And I want you to understand what that means. When Mohenjo-Daro was at the height of its civilization, the pyramids of Giza were being built. The Bronze Age was transforming human life in ways that were barely understood even as they happened. And here, in the floodplains of the Indus River, in what is now Pakistan, a civilization was building cities that were, by any reasonable measure, more advanced than almost anything else happening anywhere on Earth at that moment. Mohenjo-Daro had a grid layout, streets running north to south, east to west, at right angles, houses built to a standardized plan with multiple stories, ventilation systems, and private bathrooms connected to a citywide drainage system. Not just gutters, not open sewers. A covered underground drainage system with brick-lined channels that ran beneath the streets and carried waste away from the living quarters. A sanitation system of this sophistication would not appear in Europe until the Roman Empire, more than 2,000 years later. And some historians argue that it did not truly recover in Europe until the 19th century. There was a great bath, a massive public pool, carefully waterproofed with bitumen and brick, likely used for ritual cleansing. There were granaries, enormous structures built to hold surplus grain, suggesting a sophisticated economy with collective storage and presumably collective distribution. There was an evident concern for standardization, bricks of uniform size, weights and measures that appear consistent across the entire civilization, which stretched for more than 1 million square kilometers. And we have almost no idea who they were. This is the strange and humbling truth about the Indus Valley civilization. We know they existed. We know they built these extraordinary cities. We know they traded with Mesopotamia because their artifacts have been found there. We know they had a writing system because their seals carry inscriptions. But we have never deciphered that writing system. We do not know what language they spoke. We do not know the names of their gods, their kings, their festivals, their fears. We do not know if they had kings at all, which is itself a remarkable thing to not know about a civilization this large and this sophisticated. What we do know is that around 1900 BCE, they began to decline. And the question of why has absorbed archaeologists and historians for a century without producing a clear answer. The most widely accepted current theory involves climate change. The monsoon patterns that fed the rivers, that fed the agricultural system, that fed the million or more people of the Indus Valley civilization began to shift. Rainfall decreased. The rivers changed course or shrank. The carefully engineered agricultural system that had made this civilization possible began to fail at its foundations, and people moved. They did not catastrophically collapse overnight, or at least the evidence does not show that. They seem to have drifted away gradually. over generations, migrating toward the Ganges Valley to the east, where rainfall was still reliable. They did not vanish dramatically. They sort of dissolved, like salt in water. Gone, but not without leaving something of themselves behind. And in those cities, in those last years before the dissolution, people woke in the middle of the night. We cannot know exactly how they structured their sleep. We cannot know if they had a word for the first sleep and the second sleep. But we can know this. The human brain that woke in Mohenjo-Daro at 2 in the morning was the same brain that woke in Baghdad at 2 in the morning, which is the same brain waking in you at 2 in the morning now. The neurology did not change. The biological architecture did not change. What changed was the story we told ourselves about what it meant. And that story, the story that says a good night's sleep is an unbroken 8 hours, is, as I said at the start of this, embarrassingly recent. It dates, with uncomfortable precision, to the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people's lives were governed by natural light. You woke when the sun came up, or slightly before. You worked during the day. You ate the main meal of the day in the evening, or at midday, if you were wealthy enough to afford it. And when the light went, life contracted. Not because people were uninterested in nighttime activity, but because fire and candles and oil lamps were expensive, and also because the night had its own rhythms that people understood and respected. The night was not uniformly dark either. The moon changes everything. A full moon in an era before electric light is not a minor aesthetic detail. It is the difference between being able to see and not being able to see. Agricultural communities knew the lunar calendar not as an intellectual exercise but as a practical necessity. You did not plant or harvest or travel or build by the moon by tradition alone. You did these things by the moon because the moon was your only reliable source of light for half of every month. And in that world, a world of firelight and moonlight, and the deep darkness between them, the two-part sleep made almost biological sense. You went to bed when it got dark because there was not much else to do, and because your body, denied the stimulation of artificial light, dropped into sleep fairly quickly. And you woke some hours later, refreshed from the first sleep, in a state of mild physiological arousal that sleep researchers have since identified and named. A state somewhere between sleep and full wakefulness, with elevated levels of a hormone called prolactin, which produces a calm, dreamlike quality of consciousness that is, by most accounts, rather pleasant. People in this state would get up, or they would lie there, and they would think, they would pray, they would talk to whoever was beside them. They might go outside, if it was safe and mild, and look at the stars. They might write, if they were literate and had materials. They might visit a neighbor. In villages, this middle-of-the-night socializing was apparently not uncommon. People would make their way through the dark to a neighbor's house and sit by the fire for an hour or two before going back to their own beds for the second sleep. Think about that for a moment. In a pre-industrial village in France, or England, or Anatolia, or West Africa, or the Yangtze River Valley, a knock on the door at 2 in the morning would not have been alarming. It would have been somewhat expected. The neighbor coming by for the watch hour, the quiet social hour of the deep night. It is so different from the world we live in that it almost feels like science fiction. Let us go to another city. Let us go to Rome, not the Rome of the tourists, not the Rome of the forums and the Colosseum standing in their dignified ruin under a blue sky. The Rome of the living, the Rome of the 1st and 2nd century CE, when the city held perhaps 1 million people and was, along with its eastern sister city of Alexandria, the most powerful and most complicated urban environment on Earth. A Roman city at night was loud. This is something most people do not know. The city of Rome was so clogged with wheeled traffic during the day that Julius Caesar had issued an edict banning wheeled vehicles from the streets during daylight hours. This meant that all the delivery carts, all the wagons bringing goods to the markets, all the building materials for the endless construction projects had to move at night. The nighttime streets of Rome were filled with the creak and clatter of wooden wheels on stone, the bellow of oxen, the curses of drivers trying to navigate narrow alleys in the dark. The wealthy lived in domus, private houses built around interior courtyards that provided some buffer from the street noise. The poor lived in insulae, multi-story apartment buildings that could reach 6 or 7 stories, crammed along the narrow streets with no insulation between the street and the room. If you lived on the ground floor of an insula on a major delivery route, sleep must have been a creative challenge. And yet people slept in two parts, with a waking in the middle. Roman literature references it. Medical texts advise on it. The poet Ovid mentions it in the Amores, where a lover arrives in the time after first sleep. It is mentioned so casually, so without explanation or elaboration, that it clearly needed no explanation. Everyone knew what it was. The Roman relationship with night was complicated. The city of Rome after dark was dangerous in ways that make modern cities look positively welcoming. There was no street lighting of any systematic kind. The wealthy travelled with torch-bearing slaves to light their way, and also, frankly, to intimidate anyone who might consider robbery. The poor navigated by the light of the moon, or by the glow of fires and lamps from windows and doorways. Criminals, informers, and various other people, with reasons to avoid daylight, gathered in the shadows. The night was where the rules that governed the day loosened their grip. There was a market that opened at night, near the Tiber. A market of stolen goods, of dubious goods, of things that were better not examined too closely in the bright light of day. It operated in the hours between first and second sleep, that middle waking hour, when enough people were about to make commerce possible, but not so many that discretion could not be maintained. The Vigiles, Rome's version of a fire and night watch brigade, patrolled the streets after dark. They were mostly freed slaves, organized into 7 cohorts, covering the 14 regions of the city, primarily concerned with fire, which was the great terror of a city built largely of wood and warmed by charcoal braziers and oil lamps. Fire could take a block in minutes. The insulae, those tall, thin apartment buildings, burned with horrifying regularity. If you were a poor Roman sleeping in an insula in the middle of the 1st century, you slept your first sleep knowing somewhere in the building someone had a lamp going, knowing the charcoal in the brazier a few rooms away might tip over, knowing that the shouts that would wake you might be the shouts of your neighbors running, and that your 2 parts of sleep might be interrupted not by the gentle internal bell of your biology, but by the crack and roar of fire below. And yet you also knew something else. You knew the particular quality of the hour between first and second sleep. You knew the way the city sounded different in that middle hour, the deliveries already underway, the horses and oxen working, but the human voices low and scattered. You knew that if you got up and went to the window, you might see the torchlight of the Vigiles making their rounds, steady and reliable in the darkness. And somehow that was comforting. Human beings are very good at finding comfort in the reliable, even when the reliable thing is small. Now I want to take you somewhere different, somewhere that most histories of civilization tend to pass over too quickly, because the evidence is harder to read and the story does not fit neatly into the European-centric frameworks that dominated scholarship for centuries. I want to take you to Great Zimbabwe. Great Zimbabwe is a ruined stone city in the southeastern African highlands, in what is now the country of Zimbabwe, which took its name from this place. The name Zimbabwe, or Zimbabwe in the Shona language, means houses of stone, and the Great House of Stone, the one that gives the country its name, was built between roughly the 11th and 15th centuries CE, reaching its peak somewhere around 1300 to 1450. It is enormous. The Great Enclosure, the largest single stone structure in sub-Saharan Africa, has walls 11 meters high, 5 meters thick, and stretching for 250 meters. These walls were built without mortar. The stones were cut and stacked with such precision that the walls have stood for 600 years on the tension of their own weight and the skill of their builders. There is no mortar, there is no binding agent, just stone against stone, fitted so perfectly that grass could not grow between them. This was not a military fortification in the conventional sense. There are no firing positions, no obvious defensive emplacements. The enclosure appears to have been a ceremonial and elite residential space, the home of the king and his inner circle, surrounded by an outer city that at its peak held an estimated 18,000 people. 18,000 people. In southern Africa, in the 14th century, trading gold and ivory with merchants from the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean coast, exporting goods that ended up in China, importing porcelain from Persia and glass beads from India. Great Zimbabwe sat at the center of a trade network that covered half the known world. We know this because archaeologists found the evidence: Persian faience, Chinese celadon pottery, glass beads from the Indian Ocean trade, coins from across the Islamic world, all of it in a ruined city in landlocked southern Africa, which means that to whoever was trading these things, Great Zimbabwe was worth trading with, worth finding, worth traveling to. And we know almost nothing about the daily life of the people who built it. We know they were Shona-speaking peoples, ancestors of the Shona people who still live in Zimbabwe today. We know their economy was based on cattle herding, agriculture, and the gold trade. We know they had a king, or a series of kings, who held great power and lived within the stone enclosure. We know from the oral histories of the Shona people, histories passed down through generations of storytellers, that this was a place of great ceremony, great abundance, great prestige, but the specific texture of daily life, the particular color of an ordinary day, is hard to recover. We work mostly from the stones themselves, from the objects left behind, from oral tradition filtered through centuries. What we can say with some confidence is that in the 14th century, at the height of Great Zimbabwe's power, the people there slept the way people everywhere slept, in the pattern that the human body imposes when it is not overridden by artificial light and industrial schedules. They woke in the night. They moved through the darkness with the ease of people for whom darkness was normal, and the night had a presence for them that it has largely lost for us. The night sky over Great Zimbabwe, even today, is extraordinary. Southern Africa, far from the light pollution of cities, offers one of the darkest skies on Earth, outside of the ocean. And from the elevated plateau of the ruins, on a clear night, you can see the Milky Way as a solid band of light, so bright it casts a shadow. The Magellanic Clouds, which are small satellite galaxies of the Milky Way, visible only from the southern hemisphere, hang in the sky like pieces of cloud that forgot to disappear at dawn. For the people of Great Zimbabwe, this was not a spectacle. It was the ceiling. It was the ordinary sky, the one their eyes were calibrated to, the one their stories lived in. And when they woke in the middle of the night, in that calm hour between first sleep and second sleep, and went to sit at the edge of the stone terrace and look up, they were looking at something so vast and so specific that it makes our light-polluted modern skies seem like a kind of poverty. I want to dwell on this for a moment. The loss of the night sky is one of the least discussed environmental catastrophes of the modern era. More than 80% of the world's population now lives under light-polluted skies. In the United States and Europe, that number is over 99%. A child growing up in a modern city will go through their entire childhood without ever seeing the Milky Way. The thing that was, for all of human history, as familiar as the sun and the moon, is simply gone. Not destroyed, still there, but hidden behind a permanent orange haze of our own making. The people of Mohenjo-Daro saw it. The people of Baghdad saw it. The people of Great Zimbabwe saw it. The scholars in the House of Wisdom, who were doing the world's most advanced astronomy, were doing it while the objects of their study hung directly over their heads in a darkness we have abolished. When Hamid the baker woke in the middle of the night in 9th century Baghdad and went to the doorway of his house and looked up, what he saw was the universe. Not a metaphor of the universe, not a picture of the universe. The actual universe, immediate and overwhelming and present, spread across the entire ceiling of the world. And then he prayed and went back to sleep and woke again when the sky lightened. Now let us go somewhere I have not taken you yet. Let us go to the cold. Let us go to Cahokia. Cahokia is a name that most people outside of a relatively small circle of historians and archaeologists have never heard. And that is a scandal, because Cahokia was, at its peak around 1100 CE, one of the largest cities in the world. It sits where the city of Collinsville, Illinois sits now, just across the river from modern St. Louis. And at its height, it held somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people, which made it larger than London at the same period. Let me say that again because it deserves to be said again. Around the year 1100 CE, on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River, in what is now the American Midwest, there was a city that was larger than London. It was built by people who are called the Mississippian culture by archaeologists, and it was a civilization of mound builders. The entire landscape of Cahokia was shaped by human hands. More than 120 earthen mounds, some of enormous scale, were constructed over generations to create a ceremonial and urban landscape unlike anything else in North America before or since. The largest of these, Monk's Mound, is the largest pre-Columbian structure in North America. Its base covers more area than the Great Pyramid at Giza. It rises in 4 terraces to a height of more than 30 meters. And on its summit, there was a large wooden building, likely a temple and the residence of the Great Sun, the title of Cahokia's ruler. The city was planned with astronomical precision. Its central avenue, the Grand Plaza, was aligned with the positions of the sun at the solstices and equinoxes. There was a large circle of cedar posts, called a woodhenge by modern archaeologists, that served as a solar calendar, marking the progress of the year with the precision of a built instrument. The people of Cahokia were watching the sky and letting the sky tell them how to organize their time, and then they left. By around 1350, Cahokia was abandoned. The mounds were empty. The great wooden temple on the summit of Monk's Mound stood vacant, its doors open to the wind. The population dispersed into the surrounding countryside and eventually across the broader region, and the city returned, slowly, to the land. Why? This is the question that haunts Cahokia, the question that scholars have been working on for decades without a satisfying answer. There are theories, and several of them are probably partly right. There appears to have been a prolonged drought, consistent with broader climate changes in the Mississippi River Valley during the 13th and 14th centuries. There appears to have been significant social upheaval, possibly related to inequality and the demands of elite ceremonial culture. There may have been conflict with neighboring groups. There may have been epidemic disease, though the pre-Columbian record for this is difficult to read. What we do know is that no single catastrophe explains Cahokia's decline. It was not a conquest, it was not a volcanic eruption, it was not a single dramatic event. It was, like so many of the world's great lost cities, a slow exhaustion, a civilization reaching the limits of what its environment and its social structures could sustain, and then gradually, unglamorously, dissolving. The people did not die, they moved. They carried their culture and their knowledge and their grief with them into the dispersal. And somewhere in the memory of the indigenous peoples of the American Midwest, the memory of Cahokia lives on, though not always under that name, which is itself a colonial imposition from a neighboring group, and may not have been what the city called itself. What was it called? We don't know. The Mississippian culture did not leave written records in a form we have deciphered. The history of Cahokia is written in the shape of its mounds, in the arrangement of its plazas, in the artifacts pulled from the earth by excavation, in the bones, and in the bones of the people buried in and around those mounds. Archaeologists have found a great deal. Evidence of significant dietary variation between the elite and the non-elite. Evidence of violence, in the form of injuries and in mass burials that suggest ritual sacrifice. Evidence of trade, with objects from as far away as the Gulf of Mexico and the Great Lakes, and evidence of a society sophisticated enough and ambitious enough to build a city larger than London in a place where the winter could kill you and the spring floods could wash away everything you had built. They slept in 2 parts. We cannot know this with certainty, but we can know it with high probability because the human body was the same body, because the night was dark and the fire was their only light, and the fire did not last all night. And because the research on traditional sleep patterns in societies without electric light, done in recent decades on isolated communities in Tanzania and Bolivia and elsewhere, shows with remarkable consistency that people in those conditions naturally wake in the middle of the night, lie in a state of calm wakefulness for an hour or more, and then sleep again. The first sleep and the second sleep are not a historical curiosity. They are the default setting of the human body when it is allowed to run on its own clock. And here we should talk about what that clock is, and what it does, and why the Industrial Revolution, and specifically the spread of artificial light, disrupted it so completely that we forgot it had ever existed. The human body has a master clock. It sits in a tiny region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is located in the hypothalamus, just above the point where the optic nerves cross. It is about the size of a grain of rice, and it regulates, with remarkable precision, an approximately 24-hour cycle that governs almost every biological process in your body. Your body temperature rises and falls on this cycle. Your cortisol levels rise and fall. Your production of growth hormone rises and falls. The permeability of your gut wall rises and falls. Your pain sensitivity rises and falls. Your immune function, your cognitive performance, your mood, your hunger, all of it pulsing on this cycle, this circadian rhythm, this 24-hour clock that your ancestors carried out of Africa 200,000 years ago. And that has not changed in any fundamental way since then. The clock is set by light, specifically by the quality and quantity of light that enters your eyes. There are specialized cells in the retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that are not for vision in the conventional sense. They do not help you see. They help you know what time it is. They are exquisitely sensitive to short wavelength light, which is the blue end of the spectrum, and they relay information about light exposure directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which uses it to calibrate the body clock. When these cells detect the long, golden, low-intensity light of late afternoon and early evening, they begin signaling the brain to start preparing for sleep. The pineal gland starts producing melatonin, the hormone that promotes sleep onset. Body temperature begins to fall. The processes that are better handled during wakefulness begin to wind down, and the processes that are better handled during sleep, memory consolidation, cellular repair, immune function, waste clearance from the brain, begin to ramp up. And when these cells detect bright, blue-rich light, which is the light of smartphones and LED screens and energy-efficient lighting, they suppress the melatonin signal. They tell the brain it is still daytime. They delay sleep onset. They compress the total sleep opportunity. They do not know that the light they are detecting is coming from a rectangle in your hand rather than from the sun. They just see the light and respond accordingly. The Industrial Revolution did not invent this problem in one step. It began with gaslighting in the early 19th century, which extended the usable hours of the night significantly for the urban middle and upper classes. Then came electric light, arriving in cities in the 1880s and spreading through the first half of the 20th century. And with each extension of artificial light into the night, the first sleep crept later. The waking period in the middle compressed, the second sleep retreated, and eventually the whole two-part structure collapsed into the monophasic ideal. One long block of sleep, from a prescribed hour to a prescribed hour, defined not by your biology but by your work schedule. The first major written challenge to the assumption of monophasic sleep as the historical norm came in 1995, when the historian A. Roger E. Kirch published a paper in the American Historical Review titled "Sleep We Have Lost: Pre-Industrial Slumber in the British Isles." In it, he laid out the evidence for the first sleep and second sleep from a vast array of historical documents. The response from the historical community was initially skeptical. The response from sleep researchers was initially dismissive. The response from the general public, when it eventually filtered through, was something close to recognition, a kind of collective "oh," like remembering a dream you thought you had forgotten, because many people, probably more than anyone had counted, were already living with the middle of the night waking. They had been told it was a problem. They had been told they had insomnia. They had been lying awake in the dark, heart slightly elevated with anxiety, watching the minutes on the clock and calculating how many hours of sleep they could still get if they fell asleep right now. Right now. Now, please. Now. And what if they had been told instead that this was not broken sleep, but complete sleep? That the waking was not a failure, but a feature? That the calm clarity of the middle hour was something their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother valued and used and looked forward to? The sleep researcher Thomas Vare at the National Institute of Mental Health actually ran an experiment on this in the 1990s. He took a group of volunteers and placed them in conditions that simulated pre-industrial light exposure, dim light in the day, complete darkness for 14 hours in the evening and night. Within a few weeks, nearly all of the participants had spontaneously shifted to a two-part sleep pattern, waking for an hour or two in the middle of the night in a state of relaxed, pleasant wakefulness, before sleeping again until morning. Their hormonal profiles during the waking period showed elevated prolactin levels consistent with the calm, meditative state that historical sources describe. When they were returned to normal modern light exposure, the pattern dissolved, the middle waking disappeared, the two sleeps compressed into one. The body remembered. Even after a lifetime of being told it was wrong, let us go back to the cities now. Let us visit more of them. Because there is a kind of comfort in numbers, in the knowledge that across the whole breadth of human civilization, in cities that rose and fell, and rose again, and burned, and were rebuilt, and were abandoned, and were forgotten, people woke in the night and were not afraid. Let us go to Angkor. Angkor, in what is now Cambodia, was the capital of the Khmer Empire from roughly the 9th to the 15th century CE. At its peak around 1200 CE, the Greater Angkor area may have been the largest pre-industrial city on Earth, with a population that some recent LiDAR surveys of the region's infrastructure suggest could have reached 700,000 to 900,000 people, not concentrated in a dense urban core, but spread across a vast managed landscape of reservoirs, canals, rice paddies, and settlements, all organized around the monumental temple complexes that still stand today. The most famous of these is Angkor Wat. It was built in the early 12th century by the Khmer king Suryavarman II, and it is the largest religious monument ever constructed. Its central tower rises 65 meters. Its moat stretches for nearly 5 kilometers. Its galleries are lined with kilometers of bas-relief carvings depicting scenes from Hindu mythology and Khmer history. It was built to be a physical representation of Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the center of the universe in Hindu cosmology, surrounded by the ocean of the world. And it was built by a society that understood water with a sophistication that may not be fully appreciated even today. The Angkor hydraulic system, the vast network of reservoirs called barrays and channels that distributed water across the landscape and moderated the effects of drought and flood, was an engineering achievement of extraordinary complexity. The West Barray alone, one of the larger reservoirs, is 8 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide and was built by hand, its banks raised by the labor of tens of thousands of people, moving earth in baskets on their heads. It held enough water to irrigate rice crops across a significant portion of the Angkor agricultural zone. This hydraulic system made possible the agricultural surplus that fed the empire, and the rice surplus fed the population, and the population built the temples, and the temples attracted pilgrims and traders, and the pilgrims and traders brought goods and money and ideas, and the ideas filtered into the stone carvings that line the galleries of Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom and Bayon, where hundreds of stone faces, serene and slightly smiling, look out in all 4 directions. At night, in Angkor, the temples were lit by oil lamps and torches. Priests and monks performed rituals at specific hours dictated by astronomical observation. The rhythms of the day were organized around the movements of the sun and the moon, not because the Khmer lacked sophistication, but because the sun and the moon were the most reliable clocks available and had been relied upon for so long that the relationship between human time and celestial time was intimate and automatic. And when the lamps were extinguished and the monks retired, Angkor slept in 2 parts. The great hydraulic infrastructure dripped and channeled in the darkness. The stone faces looked out at the night with the same slight smile they wore in daylight. The birds that nested in the temple trees called their particular calls to the dark, and tens of thousands of people woke in the middle of the night and lay in the warm darkness and thought their thoughts and prayed their prayers, and perhaps, in some households, talked to the person beside them about things that cannot be said in daylight. The Khmer Empire began to decline in the 13th century. The causes are debated and probably multiple. The hydraulic system, so brilliantly effective when it worked, appears to have become overextended and poorly maintained. Sediment accumulated in the channels. The water management became harder and harder to sustain. At the same time, the empire faced military pressure from the Thai kingdoms to the west and north, and the political center began to fracture. By the early 15th century, Angkor was largely abandoned as a capital city. The Khmer court moved south to Phnom Penh, better positioned for the maritime trade that was becoming increasingly important in Southeast Asia. The great temple complexes were not abandoned entirely. Angkor Wat continued to function as a Buddhist monastery, which is part of why it survived the centuries as well as it did. But the city, the vast managed landscape, the hydraulic system, the hundreds of temples were surrendered to the forest. The forest came quickly. Tropical vegetation moves fast when it is given the chance. Roots found their way into stone joints and pushed. Trees grew between walls and through them. The carefully engineered landscape blurred and softened, and eventually disappeared under a canopy so complete that when the French explorer Henri Mouhot encountered Angkor in 1860, he seemed genuinely unable to believe that such a thing could exist in what appeared to be untouched jungle. He asked his Cambodian guides about it. They told him it was called Angkor. They had always known it was there. The forest had kept it. Now, I want to pause here in the middle of the night, because that is where we are. We are in the middle of the night together, and I want to say something directly to you. The cities we have visited tonight, Baghdad and Mohenjo-Daro, and Great Zimbabwe and Cahokia and Angkor, were not abandoned by people who failed. They were abandoned by people who ran out of options, who faced climate shifts and military pressure and resource depletion and social fracture, often all at once. Who did the reasonable thing, which was to move, to adapt, to survive, and who left behind in the earth and the stone a record of what they had built, a record that we are only now beginning to read with the seriousness and respect it deserves. The ruins of these places are not monuments to failure. They are monuments to the extraordinary ambition and ingenuity and tenacity of human beings who tried, with the tools and knowledge they had, to build something that would last. And in those places, in their time of flourishing, people slept in two parts. They woke in the night and felt what you might be feeling right now. Not panic, not brokenness, but a particular quality of consciousness that is available only in the small hours when the usual noise of the mind has gone quiet and something deeper, something more honest, has space to surface. The scholars of Baghdad called it kairos. Well, that was actually the Greek word. In Arabic, there are concepts like waqt, meaning time, and baraka, meaning blessing, abundance, a kind of overflowing grace. And the hour between sleeps was, in many traditions, considered a baraka hour, a blessed time, a time when the membrane between the ordinary mind and something larger was thin. In medieval Christian Europe, the canonical hours included a specific prayer, matins or vigils, meant to be said in the middle of the night, during the waking period between first and second sleep. The monks who woke for matins were not suffering. They were, in their understanding, waking for the most important moment of their day, the hour when God was most accessible, the hour when prayer was most potent. Across traditions, across cultures, across centuries, the middle of the night was understood as a threshold, a liminal space where the ordinary rules of waking life relaxed and something else became possible. We have not lost that. We have just forgotten what to call it. Let us go to another city. Let us go east. Let us go to Chang'an. Chang'an, the capital of Tang Dynasty China, was in the 7th and 8th centuries CE, possibly the most cosmopolitan city on Earth. Its population reached about 1 million people, and those people came from across the known world. Arab merchants, Persian refugees from the Islamic conquest of Persia, Korean scholars, Japanese diplomats and students, Sogdian traders from Central Asia, Indian Buddhist monks, Nestorian Christian priests, Zoroastrian communities, Jewish merchants. Chang'an was not just a city, it was a meeting point of civilizations, a place where the Silk Road reached its eastern terminus and deposited its human freight. People who had traveled thousands of miles with their goods and their gods and their songs and their ways of sleeping. The city was laid out in a grid of 108 wards, each enclosed by walls and gates that were locked at night. This is important. After a certain hour, the wards of Chang'an were closed, the gates were shut, You could not move freely through the city at night. The streets between the ward walls were patrolled by soldiers. The sound of a drum, struck at the watchtower, signaled the curfew, and after that signal, anyone found in the main streets without authorization was arrested. This meant that the nighttime life of Chang'an was organized on the scale of the ward, the neighborhood unit. Within your ward, you could move. You could visit neighbors. You could go to the ward's communal space. But the larger city, the avenues and markets, and imperial palace complex went quiet and locked. And within the wards, people woke in the middle of the night. They prayed in their various ways: Christian and Zoroastrian and Buddhist and Taoist and Confucian prayers, rising simultaneously from the same city into the same night sky. They wrote poems, because Tang China was the golden age of Chinese poetry, and the Chinese poets of this era understood instinctively that certain things could only be written in the middle of the night. Du Fu, the great poet of the Tang dynasty, wrote about the night constantly, about insomnia that was not really insomnia, about waking to the sound of rain, about the quality of moonlight through a window. His contemporary, Li Bai, wrote poems to the moon, as if to an old friend encountered unexpectedly. The moon in Tang dynasty poetry is not decorative, it is a presence. It is the night's reliable companion, the source of light in the darkness, the thing you look at when you wake in the middle of the night, and the fire has burned low, and the ward gates are locked, and the city is quiet, and you are alone with your thoughts, and the cold air coming through the latticed window. The Tang dynasty produced poetry of such refinement and such emotional directness that it is still considered the peak of Chinese literary achievement more than 13 centuries later. And a significant proportion of that poetry was written in the middle of the night, in the hour between first sleep and second sleep, by people who were not suffering from insomnia, but were simply awake in the way that was normal and expected, and, when conditions were right, productive. The Tang dynasty declined in the late 9th century, disrupted by the Great Rebellion of An Lushan and Shi Saiming, which lasted from 755 to 763 and cost tens of millions of lives and fundamentally destabilized the empire's power structure. It staggered on for another century and a half before finally fragmenting in 907. Chang'an was sacked. The great capital's population declined dramatically. The cosmopolitan city of 1 million, with its Persian musicians and Nestorian priests and Korean scholars, shrank and contracted. But the poems survived, copied and recopied through the centuries, studied by every subsequent generation of Chinese scholars, translated into dozens of languages. And in those poems, the night is still there, still dark and still clear, still full of the moon that Du Fu watched from his window when the city was asleep, and he was not alarmed, and he was not broken, and the night was simply the night, doing what nights do. Let us go somewhere older still. Let us go to Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan is in the Valley of Mexico, about 40 kilometers northeast of where Mexico City now stands. It was built beginning around 100 BCE and reached its height between 100 and 550 CE, when it held somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at that time and the largest city in the pre-Columbian Americas. The name Teotihuacan is not the city's original name. That name was lost when the city was abandoned around 550 CE for reasons that remain debated. The name Teotihuacan was given to the ruins by the later Aztec people, who encountered the massive stone structures centuries after the city's abandonment and were so awed by them that they named the place the birthplace of the gods. In Nahuatl, the Aztec language, Teotihuacan means the place where men become gods, or the place where the gods were created. The Pyramid of the Sun, the third largest pyramid in the world, rises 65 meters on its base of more than 200 meters per side. The Pyramid of the Moon, slightly smaller, anchors the northern end of the Avenue of the Dead, a 4-kilometer ceremonial boulevard that runs through the city's ritual core, and all of it was built to an astronomical plan, aligned with celestial events in ways that took centuries to decode and that are still not completely understood. We do not know who built Teotihuacan. This is one of the great mysteries of Mesoamerican archaeology. The city existed before the Aztec and before the Toltec. It was built by a culture that left no writing that has been deciphered, no clear ethnic or linguistic signature that connects definitively to any later group. The Aztec did not know who built it. They assumed it was the gods, and when they wanted to claim divine authority for their own empire, they made pilgrimage to Teotihuacan and performed ceremonies there, borrowing the sacredness of a city that had been dead for 1,000 years. There is something almost unbearably poignant about that. A civilization so powerful and so large that 1,000 years after its disappearance, another great civilization came to its ruins to pray. And in Teotihuacan, at its height, in the 2nd century CE, while Rome was building its own empire on the other side of the world, and the Han dynasty of China was at the apex of its power, and the Kushan Empire connected India and Central Asia in a long chain of trade, in Teotihuacan, 100,000 or more people woke in the middle of the night and looked up and saw stars so thick they were almost painful, and prayed, or thought, or talked, or went back to sleep, or did whatever people do in the middle of the night when the world has gone quiet and the mind has its own agenda. The night sky over Teotihuacan, at that altitude, at that latitude, in that era, before any form of artificial light contamination, was a different order of experience from what you and I know. The Milky Way, bright enough to read by, not quite, but close enough to seem like it should be. The planets moving against the fixed stars, with a slow deliberateness that demanded attention. The occasional meteor, the gradual turning of the whole celestial dome through the hours of the night, a motion slow enough that you have to watch for it but unmistakable once seen. The people who built the astronomical alignments into the foundations of Teotihuacan, who oriented the Avenue of the Dead along a line of celestial significance, who built the Pyramid of the Sun so that its western face faces the setting of the Pleiades, a star cluster of great importance in Mesoamerican calendar systems. Those people were not just watching the sky, they were in conversation with it. They had been watching it long enough and carefully enough that the sky's movements were part of their language, built into their largest architectural statements. And then they left. Or something ended. The city shows evidence of deliberate burning, of the destruction of elite residences specifically, which some archaeologists interpret as evidence of internal revolt of the population, turning on its rulers and burning the symbols of their power before dispersing into the landscape. If this is correct, Teotihuacan may not have been abandoned because of external pressure or environmental collapse, but because its own people decided they had had enough, which is also a very human story. Possibly the most human story. Let us now come forward again in time. Not all the way to the present, but to the early modern era, to the 16th and 17th centuries, to the period just before the Industrial Revolution when the two-sleep pattern was still universal and unquestioned, but was also, unbeknownst to anyone living through it, in its final generations. Let us go to Istanbul, Constantinople, the city of 7 hills, the city that has been, at various points in its history, the capital of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, a city that has been continuously inhabited for approximately 2,700 years, and that has been, for significant stretches of that time, the most powerful and most cosmopolitan city in the world. In the 16th century, under the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, Istanbul was probably the largest city in Europe, with a population between 700,000 and 1 million. The Ottoman Empire stretched from Hungary to the Persian Gulf, from Algeria to the Caucasus, and Istanbul sat at its center, on the point of land where Europe and Asia face each other across the Bosphorus, a strait so narrow that in the right light you can see the minarets of the Asian shore from the European one. At night, the city's 5 daily calls to prayer organized time for the Muslim population. The last prayer of the day, Isha, falls an hour and a half after sunset, and after Isha, many people went to sleep, but not all. The city had its night markets, its coffee houses, its public baths that operated through the night, its guards and fire watchmen, and water carriers, and fishermen and sailors, and all the people who have always made cities run in the dark hours. And in the mosques, there was tahajjud, the voluntary night prayer, prayed in the middle of the night, between Isha and Fajr, the pre-dawn prayer. In Islamic tradition, the last third of the night is described as a time of special spiritual proximity when God descends, in the metaphorical language of the Hadith, to the lowest heaven, and listens with particular attention to the prayers of those who wake for this purpose. So Hamid, the baker in 9th century Baghdad, and the devout of 16th century Istanbul, and the millions of practicing Muslims around the world today who keep the Tahajjud prayer, are all practicing the same middle of the night waking, the same deliberate interruption of sleep that the pre-industrial world practiced unconsciously and automatically. Religion did not invent the middle of the night waking, but religion, in many traditions, recognized it, named it, and built it into the structure of spiritual practice. Because the middle of the night was understood to be the time when the noise fell away and something real became accessible. The Sufi mystics of the Ottoman Empire, many of whom were headquartered in Istanbul, wrote extensively about the night hours as the hours of proximity to the divine. Rumi, whose poetry was composed in the 13th century and who has become in the modern world one of the most widely read poets in the English language, wrote about waking in the night as a homecoming, as returning to something that was always there, but only available when the daylight life withdrew. When I die, lay me out like a thief of the night, he wrote, or something like it, in Persian, in a language and a voice that moves across centuries and still lands with the weight of truth. The night was not empty for these people. It was full of prayer and conversation and thought, and the particular quality of presence that only arrives when the ordinary world has gone quiet. And in the cities of the Ottoman Empire, as in every city we have visited tonight, the night had a shape. It had a first part and a second part and a middle, and the middle was its own distinct thing, its own distinct experience, recognized and named and used. Let me take you to one more place, one more civilization, and then I want to stay with you for a while, in the darkness, in the middle of the night, and talk about what this means. Let us go to Timbuktu. Timbuktu. Even the name sounds like a legend, a place on the edge of the map, a destination so remote that it became a synonym for the ends of the earth. And for many centuries, from the 14th to the 17th, it was indeed one of the most remote places on earth if you were coming from Europe. But if you were coming from across the Sahara, or from the Niger River, or from the trade routes of North Africa, Timbuktu was not remote, it was central. It was where things converged. At its peak in the 15th and 16th centuries, Timbuktu was a city of perhaps 25,000 to 100,000 people, a wide range reflecting the difficulty of the historical record. It was the intellectual and commercial capital of the Mali and then Songhai empires, two of the wealthiest states in the medieval world. The gold of the Sahel, the salt from the mines of the Sahara, and the trade goods of the Niger River all flowed through Timbuktu in a commerce so vast that the Mali king Mansa Musa, when he made his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, brought so much gold with him, reportedly 60,000 attendants and 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold dust, that he actually deflated the gold price across North Africa and the Middle East for a decade. Timbuktu had approximately 180 Quranic schools, called madrasas, and 3 great mosques, the Jingareba, the Sankore, and the Sidi Yahya. The Sankore Mosque was also a university, the Sankore Madrasa, which at its height enrolled 25,000 students and housed manuscripts on subjects ranging from astronomy to law to mathematics to music to medicine. The total number of manuscripts in Timbuktu, at the height of its intellectual culture, has been estimated at between 700,000 and 1 million, making it one of the largest collections of written knowledge in the world. Many of those manuscripts are still there, in private family libraries, in deteriorating conditions that have been the subject of urgent international preservation efforts for decades. Some of them were destroyed when Islamist militants occupied Timbuktu in 2012, a crime against human knowledge of the first order. But many survived, carried out of the city by courageous librarians and family members who hid them in attics and buried them in desert sand. In the manuscripts that have been digitized and studied, There are texts on mathematics that were not known to have existed in sub-Saharan Africa. Medical texts describing treatments that are sophisticated by the standards of any tradition. Astronomical charts, legal codes, letters between scholars in different cities discussing questions of philosophy and theology with the easy familiarity of colleagues. The scholars of Timbuktu, like the scholars of Baghdad's House of Wisdom, like the monks of medieval European monasteries, like the astronomers of Teotihuacan, woke in the middle of the night, because the night was when thinking was possible in a different way, because the noise of the day, the commerce and the students, and the calls to prayer, and the camel bells of the caravans arriving from the Sahara, all of that fell away at night, and in the silence, the mind could do what it did best. The Timbuktu of the 15th century declined because of a combination of factors. The Portuguese opening of sea routes around Africa that began to bypass the trans-Saharan trade, and then the 1591 invasion by the Saadian Sultanate of Morocco, which sacked the city and exiled most of its scholars. Many of the great intellects of Timbuktu never returned. Some died in Morocco, some settled in other cities across North Africa. The intellectual culture dispersed, as intellectual cultures do when their physical home is destroyed. But the manuscripts remained, hidden in walls and cellars and desert sand, waiting, like so many of the things we have talked about tonight, waiting to be found by people who knew what they were looking at. Now, I want to stay here for a moment, in the middle of the night, in the middle of this long story, and I want to talk to you about something that has been building under the surface of everything I have said. The cities we have visited tonight, every one of them, rose to extraordinary heights, and every one of them fell. Mohenjo-Daro dissolved into the landscape. Cahokia's mounds were empty by 1350. Great Zimbabwe's stone walls stood silent. Angkor surrendered to the forest. Teotihuacan burned. Chang'an shrank. Timbuktu's scholars went into exile. Baghdad itself, the city of peace, the greatest city of the medieval world, was destroyed in 1258 by the Mongol armies of Hulagu Khan in one of the most catastrophic events in human history. The House of Wisdom was burned. The books were thrown into the Tigris in such numbers that the river ran black with ink. The scholars were killed or scattered. Centuries of accumulated knowledge were lost in days. This is the other thing about the night, about the middle of the night, about the time between first sleep and second sleep. It is the time when the mind, unprompted by the day's demands, sometimes goes to the things it cannot say in daylight. The fears, the losses, the things that cannot be fixed, the knowledge that everything ends, that the city your father built will one day be ruins, that the book you spent your life writing may be thrown in a river, that the carefully maintained canal that brought water to your fields may silt up and fail, that the empire whose edge you stand at the center of is already beginning, somewhere in its distant regions, to fray. This is not insomnia, this is clarity. This is the mind doing its job, which is to face what the daylight hours encourage us to avoid. The people of Angkor knew their hydraulic system was failing. They could see it. They tried to repair it. They ultimately could not. The people of Teotihuacan, if the revolt theory is correct, knew their social contract was broken. They could feel it. They did something about it. The people of Timbuktu knew, as the Portuguese ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope and the Saharan trade routes grew quiet, that something was changing. They could not stop it. But they knew, and in the middle of the night, in the hour between first sleep and second sleep, when the mind is soft and honest and the usual defenses are down, they probably thought about it, not obsessively, not with the grinding, circular anxiety that keeps modern people awake, but with the particular quality of acceptance that seems to arrive when the night is deep enough and the fire is low enough, and you have let go, at least temporarily, of the pretense that you are in control. There is a kind of comfort in that, a hard comfort, the comfort of honesty. Let us talk about one more thing before we begin to come back toward morning. Let us talk about what the body does in that middle hour, the hour between first sleep and second sleep, not spiritually, not philosophically, but physiologically. What is actually happening in your body when you wake at 2 in the morning and lie in the dark with your mind moving slowly through its thoughts? Your core body temperature has reached its lowest point of the night, or close to it. This is important because it means that your metabolism is at its nadir, the slowest it will be in the entire 24-hour cycle. Your brain is doing something remarkable. It is consolidating the memories of the previous day, deciding what to keep and what to release, moving experiences from short-term to long-term storage, making the connections between new information and old that will, by the following day, feel like insights. Your brain during this hour is also cleaning itself, literally. During sleep, the glymphatic system, a recently discovered network of channels that uses cerebrospinal fluid to flush waste products from the brain, becomes much more active than during wakefulness. The spaces between brain cells expand, and the fluid moves more freely, carrying away the metabolic waste products that accumulate during a day of thinking. Among these waste products is beta amyloid, the protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. Sleep is when your brain takes out the trash, and the middle of the night, if you wake and lie quietly, is a rest point in that process. Your brain is doing its housekeeping. You are simply there for it. Your heart rate is slow, your breathing is slow, your muscles are relaxed. The stress hormones that drive the waking day, cortisol and adrenaline, are at their lowest, and prolactin, the hormone associated with the quiet, meditative state that historical sources describe, is elevated. This is why the middle of the night feels different, not because the darkness is magical, though it is, not because the silence has a special quality, though it does, but because your body is in a state that is genuinely different from any other state in the 24-hour cycle. Your brain is active in a particular way. Your chemistry is different. The self that sits in the darkness at 2 in the morning is not the self that drinks coffee at 7. It is not the self that navigates the demands of the afternoon. It is something older, something slower, something more honest. The people of Baghdad and Mohenjo-Daro and Great Zimbabwe and Cahokia and Angkor and Timbuktu knew this, not in these terms. Not in terms of prolactin and glymphatic systems and beta amyloid clearance, but they knew the texture of the experience. They had names for it. They built practices around it. They made art out of it. They prayed in it. They wrote poetry in it. They talked to the person beside them in it. The quiet conversations that can only happen in the dark when the world has gone away. And then the Industrial Revolution came, and the electric light came, and the shift work came, and the alarm clock came, and the idea that a good night's sleep was a single unbroken block came, and with it came the idea that waking in the middle of the night was a failure, a disorder, something to be medicated and managed and corrected, and we forgot. We forgot so completely that the forgetting itself became invisible. We forgot that we had forgotten, but the body remembered. It always remembered, which brings us to here, to now, to you, in the small hours of wherever you are, with the ceiling above you and the darkness around you and the particular quality of the middle of the night, making everything feel slightly different from how it feels at any other time. If you are listening to this as you lie in the dark, if you woke at 2 or 3 and could not get back to sleep and reached for your phone or your tablet and found your way here, you are doing exactly what Hamid, the baker in 9th century Baghdad, would recognize. The waking is not a problem. The darkness is not a failure. The thoughts moving through your mind, soft and slow, and sometimes going to places that daylight thoughts avoid, are not symptoms. They are just the night doing what nights do. The cities we visited tonight are ruins now, or some of them. Baghdad still stands, though the Baghdad that Hamid lived in is buried under 13 centuries of subsequent history. Angkor is a park now, carefully maintained, visited by 1 million tourists a year. Great Zimbabwe's stone walls are a World Heritage Site. The mounds of Cahokia are a state park in Illinois. The Avenue of the Dead at Teotihuacan is one of the most visited archaeological sites in Mexico. But they are also, in a different sense, still alive. Because the people who built them were people, biologically identical to you, running on the same circadian clock, waking in the same middle of the same night for the same deep bodily reasons, looking at the same moon. The moon that is up there right now, if you went outside and looked, is not a different moon from the one that shone on Angkor Wat in 1200 CE, on the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan in 200 CE, on the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe in 1400 CE, on the minarets of Baghdad in 900 CE. It is the same moon, the same rock, the same light, reflected from the same sun, falling on the same species, still waking in the middle of the night and not knowing quite what to do with itself. The sleep researcher Matthew Walker, in his book Why We Sleep, writes about the epidemic of sleep deprivation in the modern world with something close to alarm. He catalogues the health consequences of chronic, insufficient sleep: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, depression, immune dysfunction, cognitive decline, a significantly elevated risk of Alzheimer's disease. He makes the case, compellingly and with extensive evidence, that the modern world's relationship with sleep is broken in ways that are costing us dearly in health and in life. But there is a distinction he makes that is important for this moment, for you, lying in the dark at 2 in the morning. The problem is not the waking. The problem is not the hour between first sleep and second sleep, the ancient, designed, biologically intended middle of the night. The problem is what we do with it. If we lie in the dark with our cortisol rising, watching the clock, calculating our remaining sleep time, dreading the alarm, the anxiety of wakefulness makes wakefulness worse. We create a feedback loop of not sleeping that becomes, over time, a genuine problem. But if we understand the waking differently, if we know what it is, where it comes from, how many billions of people in how many centuries of human civilization woke exactly as we are waking now and found the hour useful and quiet and even sometimes sacred, then the waking changes its quality. The cortisol does not rise. The anxiety does not arrive. The middle of the night becomes what it always was: a brief opening, a threshold, a specific kind of consciousness that is available only here and nowhere else. You do not need to do anything with it. You do not need to pray like a monk, or write like Dufu, or track the stars like the astronomers of Teotihuacan. You can just lie there and let the thoughts move, and let the body do its slow, thorough, ancient work of repair. And if sleep comes back before the thoughts run out, that is fine. If it does not come back for an hour, that is also fine. The second sleep, when it comes, will be good sleep. The kind of sleep that comes after the middle waking tends to be rich with REM sleep, with the vivid, narrative dreaming that the brain uses to process emotion and make the creative connections between experiences that will feel, in the morning, like something slightly resembling wisdom. The baker Hamid will wake for Fajr prayer when the sky begins to lighten. He will make his bread. He will go about his day in the magnificent, impossible city of the 9th century, among its scholars and merchants and soldiers and children and camels and books. He will sleep again the following night, in 2 parts, as he has every night of his life, and as every human who ever lived in a world without electric light slept every night of theirs. And somewhere in the city of peace, a scholar will be finishing a sentence he started in the middle of the night, in the hour of prolactin and starlight and the particular honesty of the dark. And he will not know that his city will be gone in 3.5 centuries, that the books will be thrown in the river, that the greatest library the medieval world has ever seen will be ash and memory. He will just finish his sentence and go back to sleep. Let us come toward morning now, slowly, because the night has been long and rich, and we have travelled a great distance together, and it is time to begin the return. We went to Baghdad, to the 9th century, to a city of 1 million souls at the height of the Abbasid Caliphate. We went to Mohenjo-Daro, to the 3rd millennium BCE, to a civilization so sophisticated that its sanitation system was not matched in Europe for 2,000 years. We went to Great Zimbabwe, to the stone walls of the 14th century Shona kingdom, where a king whose name we have lost looked out from a window in a wall 11 meters high at a sky blazing with stars. We went to Cahokia, to the mounds rising above the Mississippi in 1100 CE, larger than anything in contemporary London. We went to Angkor, to the stone faces gazing in 4 directions from the towers of Bayonne, serenely indifferent to the centuries passing around them. We went to Chang'an, the cosmopolitan capital of the Tang dynasty, where Du Fu wrote poems to the moon in the middle of the night when the ward gates were locked and the city was quiet. We went to Teotihuacan, where the Pyramid of the Sun rose 65 meters above a city whose name we do not know, built by people whose name we do not know. We went to Istanbul, where the minarets carried the call to prayer across a city of 1,000,000 souls on the narrow bridge between Europe and Asia. We went to Timbuktu, where the manuscripts of 1,000 years of African scholarship waited in desert sand to be found and read. And in all of these places, in all of these times, people woke in the night, in the middle of the night, in the hour between first sleep and second sleep, and they did not panic, and they did not feel broken, and the night had a shape that their bodies knew and their traditions named and their scholarship understood. The shape is still there, your body still knows it. The traditions that named it are still practiced in various forms around the world, and the scholarship is rediscovering it, slowly, and finding that what it thought it knew about sleep was incomplete. You are not insomnia. You are not broken. You are, at this particular moment, sitting at a threshold that every human who ever lived has sat at, in every city that ever rose and fell, under every sky that ever turned. The stars are still there. The moon, if it is up, is the same moon. And the night, which has always known how to take care of the people who trust it, is doing what it has always done. It is holding you. Let the second sleep come when it comes. And if it comes with dreams, let the dreams come. And if the morning comes before the dreams, let the morning come. And carry with you, into the day, whatever small piece of the night's honesty you want to keep. The baker in Baghdad will make his bread. The scholar will finish his sentence. The stone faces of Angkor will continue their four-directional vigil. The mounds of Cahokia will stand in their slow, grass-covered silence above the Mississippi, and you will move through your day with the knowledge that the night is not your enemy, that the waking is not a failure, that somewhere in the long, continuous, unbroken story of human civilization, in every city that ever held a fire and called it home, someone woke in the middle of the night and lay in the dark and thought, quietly, about whatever needed thinking, and then slept again. As you will. Sleep well. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, the night knows what it is doing. It always has. There is a temple in southern India called Brihadeswara, built in the 11th century by the Chola king Raja I. It rises 66 meters above the flat plains of the Kaveri River Delta, in what is now the city of Thanjavur in Tamil Nadu. Its tower, the Vimana, is a single tapering stone spire of such height that architects and engineers still study it, trying to understand how 11th century builders achieved a structure of that weight and precision without the mathematics and materials that a modern engineer would consider essential. The Chola Empire, at its peak between roughly 850 and 1200 CE, controlled most of southern India and Sri Lanka and conducted naval expeditions that reached as far as the coast of Malaysia and the kingdom of Srivijaya in what is now Sumatra. The Chola navy was, for its time, one of the most formidable in the world, projecting power across the Indian Ocean in a way that would not be matched by any Indian state for centuries. And in the city of Thanjavur, in the shadow of the great tower of Brihadeswara, people slept in two parts. This is not a guess or a projection. The idea of biphasic sleep, of a natural waking in the middle of the night, is referenced in traditional Tamil medical literature of the Siddha tradition, one of the world's oldest medical systems. It is referenced in Ayurvedic texts from the Sanskrit tradition as well. The middle of the night waking, in the medical literature of classical India, was not a disorder. It was a normal variation in the sleep pattern, with its own specific properties and its own recommended practices. The Siddha tradition recommended that the middle waking be used for simple meditation, or for drinking a cup of warm milk, or for lying in a state of quiet awareness without trying to force sleep. This is, with minor variations of terminology, what the sleep researchers of the 21st century are now recommending for people who experience middle-of-the-night waking and want to work with it rather than against it. 1400 years of difference, the same advice. The Chola Empire declined after the 12th century, gradually losing control of its territory to neighbouring kingdoms and to the disruptions of a changing political landscape in both India and the Indian Ocean trade world. But its architecture remained. The great temples of the Chola period are among the most sophisticated stone structures ever built in the world, and they stand today in Tamil Nadu, still used, still living, still full of the smoke of incense and the sound of bells and the prayers of people who come from the same region and, in some cases, claim descent from the same communities that built them 1,000 years ago. There is a continuity there that is unusual. Most of the cities we have visited tonight are gone in a more fundamental sense. The people dispersed, the culture interrupted, the thread broken. Teotihuacan is a mystery. Mohenjo-Daro is an enigma. The builders of Great Zimbabwe are known only through oral tradition and archaeology. But the Chola temples are still functioning temples. The tradition they were built for is still a living tradition. The people who worship there are connected, however many generations removed, to the people who built them. This is rare and worth noting. Let us go to another place where the thread is not broken, or is at least less broken than most. Let us go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is perhaps the only city on earth where it is possible to stand in the same place and be standing in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and the Roman period and the Byzantine period and the early Islamic period and the Crusader period and the Ottoman period and the modern era simultaneously. Layer upon layer upon layer of human occupation, human ambition, human tragedy, and human persistence. The city has been destroyed and rebuilt and conquered and reconquered so many times that its history reads less like a story and more like a geological formation, each age deposited on top of the last, compressed by the weight of subsequent occupation. In the 1st century CE, the city was dominated by the Second Temple. The Great Temple, built after the return from the Babylonian exile, expanded and beautified by Herod the Great, until it was one of the most magnificent buildings in the ancient world. The temple platform, the stone podium on which the temple stood, was itself an engineering achievement of the first order, involving the moving and placing of stones, some of which weigh hundreds of tons. The western retaining wall of that platform still stands today. It is what is called the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall, the most sacred site in Judaism, where people come to pray and to press pieces of paper with prayers written on them into the cracks between the stones. The stones are 2,000 years old. The prayers placed in them are placed today. The continuity is almost too large to think about. In the 1st century, in Jerusalem, a carpenter's son from the Galilee region walked through the streets of this city and taught in the temple and ate supper in an upper room and was arrested in a garden and crucified outside the walls. His followers, and the followers of his followers, and the followers of their followers, spread his story across the Mediterranean world and eventually across the entire earth. And what they built, the Christian Church, in its hundreds of forms and denominations, now has roughly 2 billion adherents. And in the monastic traditions of the Christian Church, the middle of the night waking was not incidental, it was central. The canonical hours, the structured prayers that divided the day and night for monks and nuns, included matins or vigils, the night office, typically prayed between midnight and 3 in the morning. Monasteries across Europe and the Middle East woke in the middle of the night, every night, to pray, for centuries, for more than 1,000 years of continuous practice. When the monk Benedict of Nursia wrote his rule in the 6th century CE, a document that would become the foundation of monastic life across the Western Church, he specified the hours of prayer with considerable precision. The night office was not optional. It was not something that particularly devoted monks did in addition to their regular practice. It was the practice, rising in the darkness while the rest of the world slept, to pray the Psalms in community. This was the heart of Benedictine life. Thousands of monasteries across Europe and the Middle East woke in the middle of the night for more than 1,000 years. The collective human wakefulness, represented by those night offices, all those centuries of monks and nuns rising in the dark to sing and pray, is almost impossible to calculate. It is one of the great sustained middle-of-the-night wakings in human history, and it was not considered extraordinary or difficult. It was considered the shape of a properly ordered day. The medieval monastery and the medieval village were not so different in this respect. The monks rose for matins. The villagers woke in their natural middle-of-the-night watch. Both groups were doing something that the human body designed, something that the pre-industrial world took for granted, and that the industrial world dismantled. Let us talk about what dismantled it. The gas street lamp was invented in the early 19th century. William Murdoch, a Scottish engineer working for the Boulton and Watt firm, first demonstrated gas lighting in his own home in 1792. By 1807, Pall Mall in London was lit by gas. By the 1820s, gas lighting was spreading to cities across Europe and America. The effect on the night was transformative. Suddenly, the streets at night were not just the occasional guttering torch or lantern. They were lit, steadily and reliably, for the length of entire avenues. People could see where they were going at 11 at night, at midnight, at 1 in the morning. The night lost its absolute character. The darkness that had been the organizing principle of after-dark life. The darkness that made the ward gates of Chang'an necessary. That made the vigiles of Rome necessary. That made the two-part sleep natural and inevitable, began to recede, and the culture of the night began to change. Coffee houses, already established in the 17th century as places of evening sociability, now extended their hours. Theatres began scheduling later performances. The middle and upper classes, who could afford gas lighting in their homes, began staying up later, pushing first sleep later, compressing the middle of the night waking until it was no longer a recognized feature of the night, but an interruption of it. The poor continued, for a while, to sleep in the older pattern. They could not afford gas lighting. Their nights were still organized by firelight and moonlight and the old rhythms. But the cultural authorities were the literate, and the literate were the urban middle class, and the urban middle class was making the transition to monophasic sleep under the influence of gaslight. And so, the medical and cultural literature began to reflect a monophasic norm. By the time electric light arrived in the 1880s, the shift was well underway. The first sleep and the second sleep were already beginning to be spoken of, when they were spoken of at all, as a historical curiosity or a medical problem. And with electricity extending the productive hours of the night for the working class, as well as the wealthy, the two-part sleep pattern essentially vanished from the cultural record within a generation. The last mainstream literary reference to first sleep and second sleep in British literature that Kirch found was from the early 19th century. By the mid-19th century, the reference had disappeared. The practice had become invisible, not because it had stopped happening entirely, but because the cultural framework for understanding it had dissolved. It did not stop happening, of course. Human bodies continued to be human bodies. The circadian clock continued to do what it always did. People continued to wake in the middle of the night, but now they woke in a world that told them they were sick. That told them they had insomnia. That told them something was wrong that needed fixing, and many of them, particularly those with access to medical care, sought the fix. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw the development of various pharmacological sleep aids, including chloral hydrate and barbiturates, designed to produce long, continuous sleep. These drugs worked, in the limited sense that they produced unconsciousness for extended periods. They did not, however, produce natural sleep. They suppressed the cycling of sleep stages. They reduced REM sleep. They produced a kind of chemical unconsciousness that was sleep in the sense that you were not awake, but not sleep in the sense that your brain was doing what it needed to do. The modern sleep aid industry, worth billions of dollars annually, arose from the same cultural confusion. The idea that the middle of the night waking was a medical problem to be solved created a vast market for products designed to solve it. And those products, in many cases, made the underlying situation worse by suppressing the natural architecture of sleep without addressing the root cause of the waking, which was often simply the body following its ancient, designed, pre-industrial pattern. This is not to say that genuine sleep disorders do not exist. They do, and they are serious, and they deserve serious medical attention. Sleep apnea, for instance, where the airway repeatedly collapses during sleep, causing repeated arousals and preventing the deep, restorative stages of sleep, is a genuine medical problem with real health consequences. Narcolepsy, restless leg syndrome, and other sleep disorders are real conditions that cause real suffering. But middle-of-the-night waking, in itself, without those other conditions, in a person who lies calmly in the dark and whose heart is not racing, and who can, if they are patient, return to sleep, That is not a disorder, that is a feature. That is the body doing what the body was designed to do, remembering a pattern that the world has tried to make it forget. The anthropologist Carol Worthman has spent decades studying sleep patterns in cultures around the world and has found that the so-called normal sleep pattern of modern Western societies, a single long block of sleep in a private, quiet, dark room, is actually one of the most unusual sleep environments in human history. Most human cultures, through most of human history, have slept in communal spaces, with noise, with light variation, with children and animals, and the sounds of the night interspersed. The idea of perfectly sealed, perfectly quiet, perfectly dark sleep in a private bedroom is a relatively recent invention of the industrialized world, and it may not be what the human body is actually optimized for. In the Kalahari, among the San people, who maintain one of the longest continuous cultural traditions on Earth, and whose genetic lineage is among the oldest of any living human group, people sleep around fires in communal shelters. They wake and sleep and wake again, responsive to the sounds of the night, to the movement of the fire, to the conversation of others who are also waking and sleeping in a fluid, non-linear way. Night and day are not rigidly separated. Sleep is not a sealed-off experience, but a permeable one. The San are not sleeping badly. They are sleeping in the way that human bodies learn to sleep over hundreds of thousands of years, in a world where rigid unconsciousness was not adaptive, where remaining somewhat responsive to the environment during the night was a survival advantage, where the body's version of sleep was more like a dimmer switch than an on-off switch. When we force our bodies into the rigid monophasic model, when we take our sleeping pills and pull our blackout curtains and set our alarm clocks and demand 8 unbroken hours, we are working against a system that was built for something more flexible. And the strain of that working against shows up as what we call insomnia, as the epidemic of sleep disorders that Matthew Walker and other sleep researchers document with increasing alarm, as the chronic tiredness that seems to be the defining condition of modern life. You are not the problem. The bed you have been put in, the schedule you have been given, the expectations you have been handed, those are the problem, or part of it. Let me take you back to the cities one more time, because I want to leave you there, in the specific smell and sound and texture of a particular place, at a particular time, in the middle of the night. Let us go to Alexandria. Not the Alexandria of the 19th and 20th centuries, the cosmopolitan Mediterranean city that the novelist Lawrence Durrell wrote about with such elegiac love. Not even the Arabic Alexandria of the medieval period. Let us go back further. Let us go to the Alexandria of Hypatia. Hypatia of Alexandria lived roughly between 360 and 415 CE. She was a mathematician, an astronomer, a philosopher, and the head of the Neoplatonist school at Alexandria at a time when the school was one of the most important centers of learning in the world. She was a woman, which in any other context of the ancient world would have made her role as a public intellectual essentially impossible. In Alexandria, it made her famous and respected and ultimately, tragically, a target. She was murdered in 415 CE by a mob of Christians in circumstances that remain somewhat unclear historically, but that involved her being dragged from her carriage, stripped, and killed in a church. Her death is often cited as a symbolic end of classical antiquity, though this is probably too neat a narrative for something as complicated as the end of an intellectual era. But before that end, before the violence, there was a woman who woke in the middle of the night in the city of Alexandria and thought about mathematics. Alexandria, in the 4th and 5th centuries CE, was one of the most extraordinary cities in the world. The great library of Alexandria, in its classical form, was gone by then, a victim of a series of fires and political disruptions and deliberate burnings over the preceding centuries. But the intellectual culture it had fostered was still very much alive. The Mauseon, the original institution associated with the library, still functioned in some form. Schools of philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and astronomy still operated. The city was still a place where scholars from across the Mediterranean and the Middle East came to study and to argue and to write. Hypatia taught in public, something that was unusual for women, and probably impossible anywhere but Alexandria. She lectured on Plato and Aristotle. She wrote commentaries on mathematical texts. She worked on astronomical calculations. And she did some of this work in the middle of the night, in the particular quiet that Alexandria offered when the harbour had stilled and the great lighthouse on Pharos Island cast its rotating light across the darkness of the Mediterranean. The Pharos lighthouse was, in its time, one of the wonders of the ancient world. It stood somewhere between 100 and 130 meters tall, the tallest man-made structure on Earth for many centuries, and at its top, a fire burned, day and night, fed by workers who carried fuel up the long internal ramp to the top. Its light was visible, in clear conditions, perhaps 50 kilometers out to sea. Sailors approaching Alexandria from the west or the north could see it long before they could see anything else of the city. It was the first thing they saw of Alexandria, and sometimes the last. And at night, in the city below it, Hypatia lay in the pause between her first sleep and her second, and the light from the lighthouse came through the window of her house and moved slowly across the wall as the mechanism at the top rotated, and she thought about the relationship between circles and conic sections and the motions of the planets. Or maybe she thought about other things. We cannot know. We have fragments of her work, preserved through the citations of others, and we have letters to and from her that her student Synesius wrote, which give a sense of her personality and her relationships. But we do not have a diary. We do not have the private record of the thoughts that came in the middle of the night. We have only the mathematics, which is remarkable in its own right, and which is still, in its fundamental logic, the mathematics that we use today. The Library of Alexandria's destruction, which, as I said, happened not in a single event but through a series of fires and political disruptions over several centuries, is one of the great losses of human intellectual history. We cannot know what was there, because we cannot know what was destroyed. We know the rough shape of the collection, hundreds of thousands of scrolls covering history, mathematics, literature, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, botany, law. We know that some of what was there was unique, the only copy of texts that were never reproduced, because the library was the only place that had them. What was lost is, literally, unknowable. We cannot grieve specifically for the unknown. We can only feel the general weight of the absence, the sense that something is missing in the record of human thought that cannot be recovered because we do not know precisely what is gone. But some things were recovered. Some of what the library held, or copies of it, survived in Byzantine monasteries, in the libraries of Baghdad and the Islamic world, in the Hebrew scholarly tradition, in fragments quoted by other authors. The slow, patient work of scholarship across centuries has recovered more of the ancient world than might seem possible given the scale of the losses. And Hypatia's mathematics survived. Not intact, not in her original words, but in the traces and references and transmissions of later scholars. The circle she was part of, the circle of late classical learning that she represented, did not end completely with her death. It dispersed. Some of her students went east. Some went into the monastic traditions of Christianity and carried their classical learning with them into a new context. The flame did not go out. It changed shape. The city of Alexandria went on. It was conquered by the Arabs in 641 CE, and under Arab rule, it continued as an intellectual center of a somewhat different character. The great library was gone, but the traditions of scholarship that had made the library possible were not entirely gone. They had been absorbed into other forms, into the Islamic scholarly tradition, into the Byzantine tradition, into the Hebrew tradition. They were carried forward. But the specific Alexandria of the Pharos lighthouse, of Hypatia, of the Mausian, of the late classical world that still touched the edges of ancient Athens and Rome, while already beginning to be something new, that Alexandria ended. And its ending was not dramatic, it was gradual. A slow changing of the guard, a slow shifting of where the bright center of the world's intellectual life was located. And in the houses of Alexandria, on the last night that any of it was still what it had been, people slept in two parts. And in the middle of the night, the lighthouse beam moved across the walls, and someone thought something important, and it was either written down or it was not, and either it survived or it did not. And either way, it was thought. And that is something. That is not nothing. Let me tell you about one more night. One more specific night, in one more specific place that seems to contain something essential about all of this. It is a night in the 14th century. The year is uncertain. It might be 1332 or 1337 or somewhere in between. The place is Tunis, in what is now Tunisia, and a man named Ibn Khaldun is lying in the dark. Ibn Khaldun is in his 40s. He is a historian, a philosopher, an economist, a sociologist, though that last word would not be invented for another 5 centuries. He is, in the judgment of most modern scholars who have studied his work seriously, one of the most original and penetrating thinkers in the entire history of human intellectual life. He will write, in a few years, a book called the Muqaddimah, the Introduction, which was intended as a preface to a larger history of the world. The Muqaddimah is not primarily concerned with what happened in history. It is concerned with why things happen, with the underlying dynamics that drive the rise and fall of civilizations, with the patterns that repeat across time and culture and geography, the dynamics of group solidarity that build great states and the forces that corrode them, the relationship between desert culture and urban culture, between the ruler and the ruled, between the generation that builds and the generation that inherits. The British philosopher Arnold Toynbee called the Muqaddimah undoubtedly the greatest work of its kind that has ever yet been created by any mind in any time or place. And much of it was thought through in the middle of the night. Ibn Khaldun lived in a world that was, in many respects, falling apart around him. The Black Death had swept through the Islamic world in the 1340s with catastrophic effect, killing perhaps a third of the population of North Africa and the Middle East. The political landscape of the Maghreb and Andalusia, where he had grown up and worked as a diplomat and scholar, was one of constant instability, competing dynasties, military reversals, the slow retreat of Andalusian Islamic culture before the Christian Reconquista in Spain. He himself had been imprisoned, had been in political favor and out of it, had survived the deaths of his entire family in a shipwreck, had reinvented himself multiple times, and out of this tumultuous, loss-filled life, he produced a theory of history that is, by any reasonable measure, centuries ahead of its time. The concept he is most famous for, asabiyya, meaning group cohesion or social solidarity, the force that allows a group to project power and build a state, and the forces that erode it, as success breeds luxury and luxury breeds weakness. This concept is still used by historians and political scientists today as an analytical tool. He was thinking about why civilizations fall. He was lying in the middle of the night, in Tunis, or in Fez, or in some city across the Maghreb that was struggling with the aftermath of plague and the pressure of military conflict. And he was thinking about the pattern underneath the specific events, about the shape of the story, the recurring arc from desert austerity to urban prosperity to corruption and collapse, from the next generation of hungry outsiders rising to replace what has grown soft and self-satisfied. He was, in other words, thinking about Cahokia and Teotihuacan and Angkor and Mohenjo-Daro without knowing any of their names or most of their details. He was thinking about the shape of the thing, the universal shape, and the night was quiet around him. And the thoughts came, as thoughts do in the middle of the night, with a clarity and a fearlessness that daylight does not always permit, because in the middle of the night, there is less to defend. The social persona, the careful management of what you let people see, all of that relaxes in the dark, and the thinking that is left is closer to what you actually think, closer to what is actually true. Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah was finished in 1377. He had spent years on it, but the core insights, the structural theory that underlies the whole, were arrived at in a relatively short period of intensive thinking. He described working on it with such focus and speed that he sometimes worried he had made errors in his haste. He probably thought through the framework at 2 a.m, in the middle of the night, in the old pattern, the first sleep and second sleep pattern, that he had lived with every night of his life, and that would continue for another 4 centuries before the Industrial Revolution abolished it. He did not know it would be abolished. He did not know he was living near the end of a 10,000-year-old relationship between human beings and the dark. He did not know that the night, in the sense that he knew it, was approaching its end as the primary organizing context of human sleep. He just thought his thoughts and wrote them down, and they are still here. Let us come back now, all the way back to you. You, wherever you are, whatever room, whatever city, whatever country, whatever time it is on the clock that the Industrial Revolution made necessary, the clock that measures a kind of time that most of human history never needed to measure. The human body does not know what time the clock says. The human body knows what the light is doing, and what the temperature is doing, and where it is in the cycle of the 24 hours that it has been running since long before clocks existed. And if the light has been wrong, if you have been on a screen too late, or the street light comes in through the curtains, or you have been working under fluorescent light until well into the evening, your body is probably a little confused about where it is in the cycle. And that confusion is part of why the waking feels wrong, feels like a problem, feels like something that shouldn't be happening. But here is what is also true. You are awake. The waking has happened. The body has done what the body does, has crossed the threshold between first sleep and second sleep, and arrived in this particular hour, and you have a choice about what to do with it. You can fight it. You can reach for the phone, which will send bright blue light directly to the cells in your retina that suppress melatonin, and you can scroll and watch and consume and tell your body that it is daytime again, and you can make the return to sleep harder than it needs to be. Or you can do what Hamid the baker did, what the scholars of the House of Wisdom did, what the monks in their stone monasteries did, what the people of Cahokia and Angkor and Timbuktu and Teotihuacan did, night after night, generation after generation, century after century. You can lie in the dark and let the thoughts come, and not try to stop them or force them or direct them, and let your body do the slow, thorough, ancient work that it was built for. The brain in this hour is doing things you cannot feel, but that matter enormously. It is consolidating memory. It is clearing waste. It is processing the emotional residue of the day, finding a place to file it, deciding what needs to be carried forward and what can be released. It is making the associations between experiences, the sideways connections that are the substrate of creativity and insight, and the particular feeling, familiar to anyone who has ever woken with an answer to a problem they were struggling with the night before, of having been helped by something in the night. That something is not magic, or rather, it is the magic of biology, which is the only kind of magic that is actually reliable. The brain in sleep, and in the liminal state of the middle waking, is doing work that the waking brain cannot do. It needs the quiet, it needs the darkness. It needs you to get out of the way and let it run. The cities we have visited tonight all had their night watchers, the vigiles of Rome, the soldiers at the gates of Chang'an's wards, the monks at their prayers in the Benedictine monasteries, the priests performing rituals in the lamplight of Angkor's temples, the astronomers on their rooftops in Baghdad, all of them keeping the night, witnessing it, being present in it in a way that honored the fact that the night was something specific and particular and worth being awake for. You are keeping the night too. Right now, whatever brought you here, whatever question or restlessness or simple wakefulness has you awake at this hour, you are in a lineage that stretches back to the first human being who ever woke in the middle of the night and looked up at the dark and felt, rather than fear, a kind of openness. I want to tell you something about the cities that fell, because we have talked about their falling, about the droughts and the invasions and the overextensions and the slow dissolutions, and I do not want to leave you with just that. I do not want the image of great things ending to be the last image. The people of Mohenjo-Daro, when they moved toward the Ganges Valley, carried something with them. The knowledge of how to fire bricks uniformly, the knowledge of how to build drainage systems, the aesthetic traditions of their artisans, the stories their priests told, all of it moving east with them, filtering into the cultures they joined, changing those cultures, being changed by them, becoming part of something new. The people of Cahokia, when they dispersed, carried something. The mound-building tradition, the agricultural knowledge, the astronomical understanding that had oriented the Grand Plaza, the stories of a city by the great river that was larger than anything that came before or after it in the Americas for a very long time. The scholars expelled from Timbuktu carried the manuscripts they could save. They carried their knowledge in their heads. They carried the intellectual traditions of 5 centuries of African Islamic scholarship into the libraries and schools of North Africa and the Middle East, where some of it was absorbed and some of it was lost, and some of it is still being recovered by researchers working their way through the digitized manuscripts that the courageous librarians hid in desert sand. Things end, but they also continue. The line of transmission is never entirely broken, even when it seems to be. Even when the library burns and the books are thrown in the river and the city is abandoned to the forest, something moves, something persists. It does not persist unchanged, or completely, or without loss, but it persists. You are part of that persistence. The body you carry, the mind that woke in the middle of the night and found its way to this voice in this darkness, that mind is made of everything that came before it. The biological architecture is the same. The middle of the night waking is the same. The particular quality of consciousness in this hour is the same quality of consciousness that the scholars of Baghdad had, that Ibn Khaldun had, that Hypatia of Alexandria had, that the forgotten astronomer of Teotihuacan had when he climbed to the summit of the Pyramid of the Moon and looked up at a sky that was entirely, overwhelmingly, magnificently dark. You are the same species. You carry the same clock. The night has not changed. We have changed around it, but the night has not changed. Let me give you something to carry with you as the second sleep approaches. Something small and specific, like a stone in your pocket. In 2015, a team of archaeologists working at the site of Luxor in Egypt found a tomb that had been sealed for more than 3,000 years. Inside, along with the usual funerary objects, they found a small wooden headrest. The ancient Egyptians used headrests instead of pillows, carved wooden or stone or ivory supports for the head during sleep. This one was inscribed with a text, a prayer or an invocation, designed to protect the sleeper during the night and to ensure that dreams were auspicious. 3,000 years old, a prayer for good sleep, for good dreams, for the protection of the sleeper in the darkness. The prayer is in a language that took decades of scholarship to decode. The civilization that wrote it has been gone for more than 2,000 years. The person who slept on that headrest, whose name we will never know, has been dust for 3 millennia, and the prayer is still there, still saying the same thing, still reaching across 3,000 years of darkness toward the person who is lying down and closing their eyes and hoping for good dreams. You do not have a carved wooden headrest inscribed with protective hieroglyphs. You have a phone or a tablet or a laptop, which is a different kind of inscription, a different kind of reaching across distance and darkness. But the hope is the same, the need is the same, the darkness is the same. Sleep well. The cities rose and fell and will rise again, in different forms, in different places, under different names. The knowledge that was lost will be rediscovered, or something equivalent will be found, because human minds keep making their way toward the same truths from different starting points. The thread is never entirely broken, and the night, as I said, is unchanged. It is still doing what it always did, holding the world while the world rests, making space for the things that cannot happen in daylight, being the container for the middle waking, for the thoughts that only come in the dark, for the biology that needs the quiet to do its work. You are in the night now, in the specific hour of it that has always been its own thing, its own territory, its own kind of country without borders. The scholars and the bakers and the monks and the astronomers and the mothers and the guards and the poets and the kings of 1,000 years of human civilization have been here with you. Though they are not here now, and they understood something about this hour that we have largely lost, but that your body, quietly and without fuss, still knows. It knows what this is. It has always known. Let the knowing be enough. Let the darkness be enough. Let the thoughts run where they need to run, and the body do what it needs to do. And when the second sleep comes, let it come. And when the dreams come, let them come. And when the morning comes, as it always has and always will, let it come too. You have been here before. Every human who ever lived has been here before, in the middle of the night, in the watch between first sleep and second, in the particular country that exists only here, only now, only in the small hours when the world has gone quiet and the mind has its own agenda. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone in this. The night is full of company, if you know how to read it. All those centuries, all those cities, all those people waking in the middle of the night and lying in the dark and thinking their thoughts and praying their prayers and writing their poems and doing the quiet, essential, irreplaceable work of being human in the dark. They are here in the sense that anything past is here, in the biology you carry, in the architecture of your sleeping brain, in the 24-hour clock that was wound up somewhere in the deep past of your species and has never stopped running. They are here, and the night is here, and you are here. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Sleep, when it comes, will be good. The second sleep is always good, rich and deep and healing in the particular way that only second sleep is. After the middle waking has done its work, and the mind has finished what it needed to finish, and the body is ready to descend again into the repair and the dreaming. You will wake in the morning changed by what the night did, whether or not you can name what it did, changed by the memory consolidation and the waste clearance and the emotional processing and the slow, steady, unremarkable miracle of a brain doing its job in the dark. And you will carry something forward from this particular night. Some small thing, perhaps just the knowledge that the middle of the night waking is not a failure. Perhaps just the faint recollection of a journey through cities that no longer exist in the form they once had, but that were, in their time, as vivid and loud and alive and specific as the room you are lying in right now. Baghdad at midnight, the smell of the river and the bread ovens and the particular dust of the desert. Angkor at 2 in the morning, the stone faces watching the darkness, the sound of the insects in the trees that have grown through the temple walls. The Avenue of the Dead at Teotihuacan, under a sky blazing with stars, the pyramid a black shape against a black sky, only the stars telling you where one begins and the other ends. Great Zimbabwe, the walls standing in the moonlight, the silence of the plateau, the sense of a space made deliberate and meaningful by human hands that were connected to human minds, that were connected to human hearts that loved and feared and hoped in all the ways you love and fear and hope. Timbuktu, the manuscripts in their cases, the dust of the Sahara settling on the rooftops, the sound of a student reading aloud from a mathematical text that will survive by the narrowest of margins into a future that cannot yet be imagined. Ibn Khaldun, in his room, in the middle of the night, thinking about why things rise and fall, thinking about the pattern, thinking about asabiya, the cohesion that builds great things, and about the luxury that corrodes it, thinking about the civilization he lives in, which is beautiful and learned, and also under pressure, always under pressure, and about whether the pattern that destroyed the others is operating here, now, in the 14th century, in the cities of the Maghreb, not with despair, with the clarity that the middle of the night provides. And then, having thought what needed to be thought, he will sleep, and the second sleep will take him. And in the morning he will write, and what he writes will last for centuries. You do not need to write anything. You do not need to produce anything from this waking. You just need to be here, for the time the waking lasts, and then sleep when the sleep returns. The night will do the rest. It always has. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, the night knows. And so, in some deep and ancient and pre-verbal way, do you. Rest now. Let the second sleep come. You have earned it. There is a river in Ethiopia called the Blue Nile. It begins at Lake Tana in the Ethiopian highlands and runs northwest towards Sudan, where it joins the White Nile at Khartoum, and the two together become the Nile that the ancient Egyptians built their civilization on. The Blue Nile carries the vast majority of the Nile's total water volume. It carries, more specifically, the silt, the rich, dark, volcanic silt that washes down from the Ethiopian highlands during the summer monsoon rains and deposits itself, for thousands of years, on the floodplains of Egypt, making the Nile Valley one of the most fertile strips of land on Earth. Without the Blue Nile and its silt, there is no ancient Egypt. Without the Ethiopian highlands and their monsoons. There are no pyramids, no pharaohs, no hieroglyphs, no Hypatia. At the source of the Blue Nile, at Lake Tana, there is an island in the middle of the lake. The island is called Tana Kirkos, and it holds a monastery. The monastery is believed, in the Ethiopian Orthodox Christian tradition, to be the place where the Ark of the Covenant rested for some 800 years. From the time it left Jerusalem with Menelik, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, to the time it was moved to its current claimed location in Axum. Whether or not this history is accurate, the monastery is very old. The tradition of island monasteries on Lake Tana stretches back more than 1,000 years, and the monks who live there, and have lived there for centuries, wake in the middle of the night to pray. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church practices one of the most ancient and least altered forms of Christian liturgy on earth. Its roots predate the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. Its canon of scripture is larger than that of any other Christian tradition, and includes texts that other traditions discarded in the early centuries of Christianity. Its monks observe prayer cycles that descend from the very earliest monastic practices, including the night office, the middle of the night prayer, that was also practiced by Benedict's monks in Italy, by the Desert Fathers in Egypt, by the hermits of the Syrian tradition. On Lake Tana, in the middle of the night, monks on an island in the middle of an African lake wake and pray. They have been doing this for more than 1,000 years. The world has changed around them with bewildering speed, and they continue to do this. The night prayer of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is called the Kidasi, and it is sung, the entire liturgy chanted in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia, which is to modern Amharic roughly as Latin is to modern Italian, the older, formal, sacred form of the language family. Imagine being on the water of Lake Tana at midnight. The lake is large enough to have its own weather. The highlands surrounding it are dark shapes against a sky that is, if you are lucky, full of stars so dense and so bright that the lake below them reflects them, so that you are surrounded on all sides by stars, the real ones above, and their reflections below. And from the island, faintly, if the wind is right, the sound of singing, the monks at their night prayer, the Ge'ez syllables carrying across the water, ancient and particular and alive. This is still happening, right now. Not the specific night I am describing, but the practice. The monks of Lake Tana's island monasteries still wake in the middle of the night and sing. They have been doing it for so long that it has become as natural as breathing, as automatic as the double sleep that their bodies would perform anyway, if the prayers were not there to give it form and purpose. The prayers grew up around the waking. The human tendency to be awake in the middle of the night, to find the hour of the middle waking available and clear, and somehow close to something important, attracted the practice of prayer the way a river attracts settlement. The condition was already there. The practice gave it shape. Let me tell you about a different kind of night watcher. In the Arctic, above the tree line, in the world of the Inuit peoples, the relationship with night and day is not the relationship of temperate climates. There are seasons, in the far north, where the sun does not set for weeks, and seasons where it does not rise. The darkness of the Arctic winter is a different darkness from any other darkness on Earth. It is not the darkness of a night that will be followed by a morning in 6 or 8 hours. It is a darkness that will last for weeks, months. And in that darkness, people sleep differently. Or rather, they did, before the disruption of traditional life by colonial contact and the introduction of electricity and the structures of industrial time. In traditional Arctic cultures, the concept of sleeping a fixed amount at fixed times and then being awake at fixed times was not a given. The body, with no dawn to tell it when to wake, adapted to different rhythms. Sleep came in multiple shorter bouts through the long night. People woke and ate and worked and visited and slept again. The line between day and night, so sharp in temperate climates and so important to the agricultural societies we have been visiting, was blurred almost to nothing. This is sometimes called polyphasic sleep, sleeping in multiple shorter periods rather than 1 or 2 longer ones. And it is actually the most ancient pattern, the one from which the biphasic 2-sleep pattern is likely a specialization. Infants sleep polyphasically. Before infants are trained, by the cultural expectations of their caregivers to consolidate their sleep into fewer, longer periods. They sleep in short bouts throughout the 24 hours. This is the mammalian default. The single long block of sleep is an innovation. The multiple short sleeps are the baseline. The agricultural revolution changed the relationship between humans and the night in ways that are easy to underestimate. Before agriculture, the need for a rigid daily schedule was much lower. You did not have to be in a specific field at a specific time to manage crops that had been planted in a specific pattern on a specific calendar. You moved with the game, the seasons, the water. You slept when you were tired. You woke when you were rested or when something needed your attention. The night was not your enemy, and it was not your schedule. It was simply part of the world. Agriculture changed that. Suddenly there were specific tasks that had to be done at specific times. The planting window was narrow. The harvest window was narrow. The irrigation channels had to be managed on a schedule dictated not by inclination, but by the needs of the crops. And the domestication of animals added further schedule. Animals needed to be fed and milked and guarded at specific times. The day acquired a structure that was imposed from outside the self by the demands of the agricultural system, and the night acquired its character, partly by contrast, as the space that was not the structured day. And yet, even in the most agricultural of societies, the night retained its two-part character, because the agricultural revolution did not change the human brain. It changed the human lifestyle. But the brain it was operating in was the same brain that had been sleeping in multiple bouts in the African savanna for hundreds of thousands of years. It was the same brain that would, if given the chance, still return to its multi-part default. The two sleeps of pre-industrial agriculture are a compromise, a meeting point between the agricultural need for a regular schedule and the brain's polyphasic baseline. Two sleeps, with a waking between them, is more regular than polyphasic sleep, more compatible with a life that requires showing up for specific tasks at specific times. But it retained the ancient character of the night as something with a middle, something with a texture, something that was not a sealed black box of unconsciousness, but a permeable and variable experience. And now we have the industrial model, one block of sleep, defined by the clock, initiated by exhaustion rather than by the body's natural timing, and expected to be sufficient regardless of individual variation or seasonal change, or the specific pressures of the specific day. One size, required to fit all. It does not always fit. This is why you are awake right now, or one reason. The industrial model has pressures that push against the body's defaults. The blue light of screens delays sleep onset. The caffeine that keeps the productive day going suppresses adenosine, the brain chemical that builds sleep pressure, and when the caffeine wears off and the sleep pressure floods back, it floods back chaotically, producing the feeling of needing to sleep before you have done the things you needed to do, and then being unable to sleep once you have finally gotten to bed. The alcohol that many people use to initiate sleep suppresses REM sleep and causes a rebound in the second half of the night, producing fragmented, unrestful sleep and early morning waking. The industrial model of sleep is not working for a significant proportion of the population, and rather than questioning the model, we have built a vast industry around trying to make people fit it. The alternative is not to throw away clocks, or quit your job, or sleep in the forest. The alternative is to understand what you are and work with it rather than against it. The alternative is to know that the waking in the middle of the night is probably not insomnia, that it is probably the body doing its thing, that the response to the waking, not the waking itself, is what determines whether it becomes a problem. If you lie in the dark and let your mind do what it does, the thoughts will run for a while, and the hormonal conditions of the middle waking will support a pleasant, calm, slightly dreamy quality of consciousness. And eventually, usually within an hour, the second sleep will arrive on its own. If you turn on a bright light, or reach for a screen, or begin aggressively trying to force sleep by counting or breathing in specific patterns, or worrying about how many hours you have left, you will keep yourself awake. The body cannot be forced to sleep. It can only be allowed to sleep. Let me tell you something else about the falling cities, the ones we have visited tonight. Something that applies to you, in this moment, in the middle of this night, every one of those cities fell. Every one. Mohenjo-Daro, Cahokia, Angkor, Teotihuacan, the great Baghdad of the Abbasid Caliphate, great Zimbabwe, Timbuktu, they all fell in some sense. They all lost the form they had at their peak. They all became something other than what they had been. And the people who lived through the falling survived. Not all of them. The violence was real, the famine was real, the disease was real. People died. Many people died. But the culture survived, in the sense that a river survives when you dam it. It finds another way. The knowledge moved, the art moved, the practice moved, the bodies moved, carrying in their DNA the genetic contributions of everyone who had come before, and in their memories the stories, and in their hands the skills. You are, in a very literal sense, the product of every city that ever fell. Your ancestors, whoever they were and wherever they lived, survived situations that felt like the end multiple times. Situations of famine and plague and conquest and climate shift and the slow grinding failure of systems that had seemed permanent. And something in them persisted, not unchanged. Nothing persists unchanged, but persisted. And here you are, in the middle of the night waking that has been a feature of human sleep for the entire history of the species intact in you, your body running the same program it has always run, your brain doing the same ancient work it has always done. You are the end of a very long line of people who survived the night. The specific fears that keep you awake, the specific anxieties or griefs or unresolved questions that your mind returns to in the middle of the night, those are yours alone, no one else's. But the fact of the night waking, the fact of the mid-sleep consciousness, the fact of the brain working in the dark while the body is still, that is shared with everyone who ever lived, with every person in every city we have visited tonight. You are not alone in it. You have never been alone in it. The company is silent, but it is present. All those centuries, all those people, all those middle-of-the-night moments of clarity or confusion or prayer or poem or mathematics, or simply the quiet recognition that you are here and you are alive and the night is doing what the night does. It is enough. It has always been enough. Let me stay with you for a little while longer. The night is long and there is still time before the second sleep comes, and there are still things to say. I want to tell you about something that happened in the ruins of Pompeii, which is not a city we have visited tonight, but which has a piece of information that belongs here. When archaeologists excavated Pompeii in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they found, among many other things, evidence of the sleeping arrangements of ordinary Roman families. The houses, preserved under the volcanic ash of the 79 CE eruption of Vesuvius, showed rooms that were used for sleeping that are notable for several things. They were small. They were typically interior rooms without windows, or with very small windows, evidently chosen for their darkness and their quietness relative to the street. And they were positioned in the house in ways that suggest sleeping was taken seriously as an activity worthy of specific architectural provision. But they were also communal in ways that modern Westerners might find surprising. The nuclear family sleeping arrangement, the idea that the parents sleep in one room and each child sleeps in their own room, was not the Roman pattern. Families slept together, in the same room, with slaves potentially nearby or in the same space. The bedroom as a private space sealed off from other family members is a relatively recent concept, associated with the rising prosperity of the middle class in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the increasing availability of larger houses with more rooms. Before that, and this is true across most human cultures for most of human history, people slept together in the same room, aware of each other's presence, each other's breathing, each other's nocturnal movements. The sleeping person was not sealed into solitude. They were part of a group, and the group's collective nighttime experience was shared. This changes the quality of the middle-of-the-night waking significantly. If you wake in the middle of the night, in a room shared with your family, and you lie quietly for a while, you become aware of the breathing of the people around you. The slow, regular breathing of sleep has a particular quality that is, if you are attuned to it, rather comforting. It says, they are here, they are alive, The world has not ended while I was sleeping. The Roman father who woke in the middle of the night and lay in the dark of his small windowless bedroom would hear his wife's breathing, perhaps his children's breathing from a nearby room or mat. The baker Hamid in Baghdad would hear his wife, lying beside him, waking at the same time or sleeping still, her breath in the darkness a form of company. The loneliness of the modern middle-of-the-night waking, the sense that you are awake in a dark that has closed over you like water, is in part a product of modern sleeping arrangements. The sealed private bedroom, the single person sleeping alone, or the couple sleeping in a room sealed away from any other human presence, has removed the natural companionship of shared sleep. And when you wake in the middle of the night, there is often no one's breathing to remind you that the world is still there, still occupied by people who are, for now, at rest. This is something worth knowing, not because you can necessarily change your sleeping arrangements, but because understanding why the middle of the night waking feels lonelier than it perhaps should helps you approach it differently. The loneliness is not inherent to the waking. It is a condition of the specific modern context. In another time, in another place, you would wake and hear the breath of other humans and know that you were among your people, in the dark, all of you suspended together in the pause between first sleep and second. You can approximate that, in a small way, the sound of someone sleeping nearby, if there is someone nearby, the sound of an animal, if you have an animal, whose breathing and occasional shifting you can hear through the night, even the sound of rain or wind, or the particular sounds of your specific neighborhood at night, can serve as a kind of company. The world is there, it is still running, you are in it. That is something. I want to tell you one more thing about the sleeping of animals, which is relevant here and which is remarkable. The great whales, the blue whales, and the sperm whales, and the humpbacks sleep in a way called logging, where they float just at the surface, motionless, their blowholes just above the water, drifting with the current. They sleep in one hemisphere of the brain at a time, which allows them to maintain some awareness of their environment even during sleep. They can be approached quite closely when they are logging, because they are deeply asleep but not entirely unaware. Dolphins sleep the same way, one hemisphere at a time. So do many birds. The albatross, which can spend years at sea without landing, is believed to sleep in brief snatches while gliding, with one hemisphere sleeping and the other managing the complex aerodynamics of soaring on the updrafts above the ocean. Even fish sleep, in a way. They enter states of reduced activity and reduced responsiveness that have the functional characteristics of sleep. They hover in protected spots. Their metabolism slows. Their responsiveness to stimuli decreases. Even creatures without a brain, in the mammalian sense, like jellyfish and worms, show sleep-like states of quiescence that are sensitive to light and that affect their subsequent behavior. Sleep is ancient, older than the vertebrates, older than the mammals, older, possibly, than the arthropods. Whatever sleep is doing for biology, whatever its essential function, it is something that evolution discovered so long ago and valued so highly that it has been conserved across billions of years of evolutionary divergence. Every complex animal on Earth sleeps in some form, and the specific form of human sleep, the two-part sleep, with the middle waking, is not a defect in a system designed for monophasic sleep. It is what the system does when it is left alone. It is the system working correctly, running its ancient program without interference. The interference is what is modern. The program is as old as humanity. You are running the ancient program right now, in the middle of the night, while the rest of the modern world, mostly, sleeps or tries to sleep its industrial monoblock sleep, while the phones on bedside tables suppress the melatonin of the people who reach for them a little too late, while the screens glow in bedrooms where people are trying to make themselves tired enough to sleep by consuming content until consciousness gives way. You woke, maybe in spite of yourself. Maybe the phone did not put you back to sleep fast enough, or the content you were consuming caught a thread of thought that your mind wanted to follow, or your body simply did what it was designed to do and brought you to this middle waking without asking permission. And here you are, in the middle of the night, in the middle of this story about cities and sleep and the long human conversation with the dark. The story is almost done, not because there is no more to say, but because the night is finite, and the second sleep will come, and it is better to let you sleep than to keep talking until the alarm. Let me give you the last few cities quickly, like lights seen from a moving train. Not stopping, just passing. Just enough to see that they were there. Carthage, on the North African coast. For 6 centuries, the great commercial power of the Western Mediterranean, until Rome destroyed it so completely in 146 BCE that the phrase Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed, became a byword for the kind of annihilating political will that leaves nothing standing. They ploughed the ruins, they scattered the people, and still, some of what Carthage was, its agricultural knowledge, its astronomical traditions, its commercial practices, survived in the people who carried it away, in the Berber communities of North Africa who maintained their own traditions even after the Phoenician ruling class was gone. At night in Carthage, in the centuries of its power, people slept in 2 parts and woke in the middle and looked out at the harbour and saw the lights of ships at anchor, the great commercial fleet that made Carthage wealthy, the ships that carried tin from Britain and silver from Spain and grain from Sicily and purple dye from Tyre, all of it moving through this harbour, making this city the clearinghouse of the Mediterranean world. Nimrud, the Assyrian capital, in what is now northern Iraq, abandoned in the 7th century BCE, when the Assyrian Empire collapsed under the combined pressure of Babylonian and Median armies. The massive stone reliefs of winged bulls and lion hunts that lined its palace walls were stolen and sold and scattered to museums around the world, and in 2015, ISIS bulldozed what was left. Another act of deliberate cultural destruction. In a very long history of deliberate cultural destruction, the carvings are gone. The knowledge of who made them and why is still being slowly recovered from the cuneiform tablets that survived. At night, in Nimrud, in the 8th century BCE, scribes working in the palace complex by lamplight copied texts onto clay tablets, pressing the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform into the soft clay with a stylus, and those tablets would survive to be excavated by Austin Henry Layard in the 1840s, and some of them would turn out to be the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest written story in the world, a story about a king who loses his best friend to death and sets out on a journey to find the secret of immortality. He does not find it. He is told instead by a tavern keeper he meets at the edge of the world to enjoy his life, to eat and drink and be merry and love the one who is with him, because that is what there is. The Epic of Gilgamesh was written down in Nimrud, or in Nineveh nearby, in the 7th century BCE, from versions that had been circulating orally for centuries before that, and the scribes who copied it woke in the middle of the night, between their first sleep and their second, and lay in the dark and thought, perhaps, about what it means to be alive in the face of death, about what it means that things end, about the tavern keeper's advice. Live while you are living. This is good advice for the middle of the night. It is good advice for any time, but it has a particular resonance in the small hours, when the defenses are down and the mind sometimes goes to places that daylight thoughts avoid, to the knowledge that we are temporary, that everything we build is temporary, that even the mountains move if you give them enough time. The tavern keeper at the edge of the world said, "When you find the edge of the world, do not stand there in despair. Go back, eat and drink, hold your child, love your partner. These are the things that are there. These are the things that matter." Gilgamesh does not find immortality. He finds his way home instead, which is, when you think about it, the most honest and generous ending a story about mortality can have. You are going to go home too, to the second sleep, to the morning, to the day that follows this night, which will be specific and ordinary and full of the specific and ordinary requirements of your specific and ordinary life, which is the only life you have, which is the life that is actually there, which is the thing the tavern keeper at the edge of the world was trying to tell you. Be here. While you are here. You are here now, in the middle of the night, in the particular hour that has always been its own country, and you have been good company for these hours, through these cities, through this long, slow journey from Baghdad to Mohenjo-Daro, to Great Zimbabwe, to Cahokia, to Angkor, to Chang'an, to Teotihuacan, to Istanbul, to Timbuktu, to Alexandria, to Thanjavur, to Jerusalem, to Lake Tana, to Nimrud, to Carthage, to here, to now, to you. The sleep researchers have a term for the process of lying in the dark and letting the body sink back towards sleep. They call it hypnagogia, the state between wakefulness and sleep, the threshold state, the place where the mind generates the drifting imagery and the sudden connections and the occasional falling sensation that signals the muscles finally letting go. It is not sleep yet. It is the approach to sleep. It is the corridor. You may be in that corridor now, or not yet, or past it, and surfacing briefly into this voice before sinking again. Either way, the corridor is there, the approach is there. The second sleep is there, on the other side, deep and good and ready to receive you. And in the morning when you wake, try to remember something. Try to remember that the waking in the middle of the night was not a failure, that it was the oldest part of you, the part that predates agriculture and architecture and writing and city walls, doing what it was built to do, that you were in the company of the baker in Baghdad and the scholars of Timbuktu and the stone-faced watchers of Angkor and the astronomers of Teotihuacan and the poets of Chang'an and the monks of Lake Tana, all of them awake in the middle of the night, all of them in the same country without borders. You were not alone. You were never alone. The night has been long and full and real, and now it is coming to its end, the way all nights come to their end. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, the dark beginning to thin at its edges, the quality of the silence beginning to change from deep to merely quiet. This is the hour the birds know. Before the light is visible to human eyes, the birds know. The particular light that precedes sunrise by an hour or more, the light that exists on the cusp between night and day, is enough for them. They begin to call, softly at first, one voice, and then another, and then more, until the dawn chorus is in full voice and the day has arrived in sound before it has arrived in light. The dawn chorus is one of the most beautiful things in the natural world. It exists because male birds use the early morning, that peculiar light that is enough for their eyes, but not yet enough for predators, to sing their territorial songs and their mating songs without risk. It is biology producing something that to human ears sounds like joy. In Baghdad, in the 9th century, Hamid, the baker, heard it. The pre-dawn chorus of birds over the Tigris, a sound that has not changed in 1400 years. The same birds, the same songs, the same light that triggers them, the same crossing from night to day that they are celebrating. You will hear it too, if you have your window open and it is the right season and you are awake early enough, or you will see the light change if the curtains are thin enough, or you will simply feel the night end, as sleepers have felt it end since the beginning of human sleep, not with an alarm, but with the gradual return of the waking world, the sounds and the light and the temperature change that tell your ancient circadian clock that the night is over and the day is beginning, and it is time now to start the process of coming back. But you are not there yet. There is still night. Still the middle of it, or the last part of it. Still the country between first sleep and second. Still the time that belongs to the thoughts that only come in the dark. And so I will leave you here, at this hour, in this particular quality of the dark. Leave you to the thoughts that are moving through your mind, wherever they are going, whatever they need to find. Leave you to the body that is doing its ancient, thorough, unremarkable work. Leave you to the second sleep when it comes. I hope it comes soon. I hope it comes deep and good and full of whatever dreams your mind has been sorting through on your behalf in the dark. I hope the morning, when it comes, is a morning that feels possible rather than impossible. I hope the day that follows this night has something in it that reminds you of what it is to be alive in a world that is, even now, in all its difficulty and all its complication, extraordinary. You are a living thing on a living planet, under a sky that has not changed in all the time that cities have been rising and falling beneath it. You carry in your biology the accumulated experience of every ancestor who survived every night that came before this one. You carry in your mind the stories, however distant and fragmentary, of every civilization that ever tried to build something permanent in a world that does not permit permanence. You carry the middle of the night, the waking that belongs to no schedule, that answers to no alarm, that simply comes when the body is ready for it and stays for as long as it needs to stay, and then releases you back to the sleep that completes it. This is yours. It has always been yours. The baker in Baghdad goes back to sleep. The stone faces of Angkor watch the darkness. The manuscript librarians of Timbuktu have hidden their books and waited. The monks of Lake Tana finish their night prayer and return to their cells. Ibn Khaldun writes one more sentence and then sets down his pen. And you, wherever you are, whatever your name, whatever the specific weight of this particular night, you let the thoughts slow and the muscles soften and the breath deepen, and the second sleep, which has been waiting for you the whole time, patient and ready, comes. Sleep now. The night knows what it is doing. It has always known, and so do you. Good night. Let me tell you about the water. In almost every great city we have visited tonight, water was the organizing principle, the engineering challenge that, when solved, made everything else possible. Mohenjo-Daro's extraordinary drainage system. Baghdad, on the confluence of the Tigris and the Euphrates, the two rivers that had created the agricultural surplus of Mesopotamia for thousands of years before the Abbasid Caliphate was even imagined. Angkor's massive network of reservoirs and canals, the hydraulic infrastructure that turned a monsoon-dependent landscape into a reliable agricultural system capable of feeding hundreds of thousands. Teotihuacan's position in a valley that could be irrigated from mountain springs. Cahokia, on the banks of the Mississippi, the greatest river in North America. Great Zimbabwe, on the elevated plateau where rainfall was reliable and rivers ran. Timbuktu at the bend in the Niger River, positioned perfectly for the river trade, while also accessible to the trans-Saharan routes from the north. Water made the cities, and the management of water was, always, a civilizational project. Something that required organization, cooperation, planning across generations, and the maintenance of systems more complex and fragile than any single administration could easily sustain. When the water systems failed, the cities fell. The Indus Valley civilization's decline correlates with shifts in the monsoon. Angkor's hydraulic system silted up, and the water management became impossible to maintain at the required level. The irrigation systems around Mohenjo-Daro may have been disrupted by changes in the course of the Indus River, which is a living river that moves across its floodplain over time. The wells of Cahokia may have been affected by the drought that gripped the Mississippi Valley in the 13th century. Water is patient, in a way that human civilization is not. Water will find its way. It will go where the gradient takes it. It will fill the spaces available to it. It will carve its own channels if the channels it has been given are blocked. And when the channels that the civilization built to contain and direct it are not maintained, it will simply go back to doing what water does, finding its own way, regardless of the plans that have been made for it. The people who built those irrigation systems, those reservoirs, those drainage channels, understood water the way we understand code, as a system with rules that could be worked with but not overridden. You could build the channels, you could maintain them, but if you stopped maintaining them, the water would not wait. It would find another path. This is a metaphor, obviously, but it is also literal. The management of water in the great civilizations of history required continuous human attention and continuous institutional capacity. When the institutions weakened, when the administrative systems were disrupted by war or plague or internal conflict, the water management was among the first things to fail because it was the most demanding. It required the most people, the most coordination, the most consistent effort over the longest timescales. And when the water systems failed, the agricultural systems failed. And when the agricultural systems failed, the food supply failed. And when the food supply failed, the cities emptied. This is the deep mechanism under many of the stories we have told tonight. Not the dramatic final moment, the burning or the conquest or the abandonment, but the slow weakening of the water system that preceded all of it, sometimes by decades or generations. The people who lived through it, the people who watched the fountains of Baghdad dry up when the Abbasid administrative capacity weakened, who watched the barrays of Angkor fail to fill as they should, who watched the springs of Teotihuacan yield less and less water as the forests on the surrounding hillsides were cut for fuel. Those people did not necessarily understand what they were watching. They could see the water level dropping, they could see the crops struggling, they could feel the city weakening around them, But the systemic understanding of why, the understanding that the water management system was failing because the institutions that maintained it were failing, and the institutions were failing because the social cohesion that made the institutions possible was failing, that systemic understanding was rarely available to the people inside the system. Ibn Khaldun came close. His concept of asabiya, group cohesion, captures something of this dynamic. That what makes a civilization possible is not just technology or resources, but the willingness of people to cooperate, to subordinate individual interest to collective need, to maintain the systems that everyone depends on, even when the immediate personal benefit of doing so is not obvious. When that willingness erodes, the systems fail. And when the systems fail, the water runs in the wrong direction. We are not immune to this. The modern world has its own water management systems, its own agricultural infrastructure, its own supply chains and energy grids, and institutional arrangements that require continuous maintenance and continuous cooperation. They are more robust than anything the ancient world built, in many respects, but they are also more complex, more interdependent, and more demanding of the kind of long-term thinking and political cooperation that human societies have historically found difficult to sustain. This is not doom, this is just the shape of the thing. Civilizations are difficult, maintaining them requires effort. The effort is worth making, but it must be made. The people of Angkor made the effort for 500 years. The people of Cahokia made the effort for 300 years. The people of Mohenjo-Daro made the effort for 600 years. These are not failures. These are extraordinary sustained achievements. The fact that they eventually ended does not diminish what they were. The fact that the water management eventually broke down does not erase the centuries during which it worked, and worked brilliantly, and made possible a human flourishing that would not otherwise have existed. Every night, in those flourishing centuries, people went to sleep and woke in the middle and slept again. Every night, the stars turned overhead and the rivers moved, and the crops grew in the irrigated fields, and the city continued to be what it was, a human miracle, temporary like all human miracles, extraordinary like all human miracles. You are living in a human miracle too, the one you are in right now. The city or town or village or wherever you are, the systems that deliver water to your tap and power to your lights and food to your kitchen are each of them a civilizational achievement, as remarkable, in their own way, as the berets of Angkor or the drainage channels of Mohenjo-Daro. They are not permanent. They require maintenance. They are more fragile than they look. But right now, tonight, they are working. The water is there. The light, which you are not using because you are in the dark and that is appropriate, is available if you need it. The food for tomorrow is, in all likelihood, already provided for. Right now, tonight, the civilization is holding. The systems are working. You are warm or cool or whatever the temperature is that you need. In a shelter that is doing its job, in a moment that is, despite everything that is difficult about it, a moment of human civilization at a relatively functional point in its operation, that is worth noticing, worth being quietly grateful for, in the particular honest gratitude that the middle of the night makes possible, not the performed gratitude of the daylight hours, the gratitude that has an audience, the private gratitude, the kind that is just a recognition, simple and unadorned, that things could be much worse, and that they have been much worse for many people in many places, and that right now, in this specific moment, the water is on, and the walls are holding, and the night is doing what the night does. Let that be a kind of peace, if it can be. I want to tell you about light one more time, because I think there is something here that belongs in the last part of this night. The stars that you would see if you went outside right now, or would have seen without the light pollution that covers most of the places where most of us live, those stars are not the stars that the people of Baghdad saw, or that the scholars of Timbuktu saw, or that the priests of Teotihuacan tracked in their astronomical observations. Not exactly. Because the universe is not static, the stars move, relative to each other, over very long timescales. The constellations as the people of Babylon saw them are not quite the constellations as the people of ancient China saw them, because the Earth's axis wobbles on a slow cycle of about 26,000 years, and over centuries that wobble shifts, which stars are prominent in the night sky. The precession of the equinoxes, this slow wobble of the Earth's axis, is one of the reasons that Polaris, which we call the North Star, is not always the North Star. In ancient Egypt, the North Star was Thuban, in the constellation Draco. In the time of Julius Caesar, it was a star called Kokab. It will not always be Polaris. In about 12,000 years, it will be Vega. The sky is not fixed. The frame of reference that ancient astronomers used to orient themselves is not quite the same frame of reference that modern astronomers use. The stars themselves, in their absolute positions relative to each other, have drifted over the timescales we have been discussing tonight. And yet the moon is the same moon. The sun is the same sun. The broad architecture of the night sky, the Milky Way as a band of light, the planets wandering among the fixed stars, the seasonal rising and setting of particular star groups, the great bowl of the sky turning on its axis while the Earth turns beneath it, all of that is essentially unchanged. The same sky that the people of Mohenjo-Daro looked up at in 2500 BCE is, in all its important qualities, the sky you would see tonight if you went outside and looked. The scale of it is unchanged. The darkness between the stars is unchanged. The sense of being a small thing under a very large sky, that has not changed either, though most of us in the modern world have lost access to the experience of it, hidden behind our light pollution. But the sky is there, the stars are there, the darkness is there. You just have to go outside and look. Not tonight necessarily. Tonight the second sleep is closer than the horizon, but sometime, when you have the chance, when you find yourself somewhere where the light pollution is thin enough to see the Milky Way, or even just a few hundred stars, rather than the handful that are bright enough to punch through the orange glow of a city sky, go outside, in the middle of the night, in the hour that we have been talking about all evening, and look up. What you will see is what Hamid saw, and what the scholars of Baghdad saw, and what the astronomers of Teotihuacan saw, and what the monks of Lake Tana saw, and what the residents of every city we have visited saw when they woke in the middle of the night, and went to the window, or the doorway, or the terrace, and looked up. The universe, not a picture of it, the actual thing, and you will feel, if you let yourself feel it, what they all felt. A sense of scale that is not frightening, but calming, because it puts the specific anxieties of the specific night in their proper perspective, not diminishing them exactly, but locating them correctly. In a universe that is vast and old and indifferent, and also, somehow, beautiful beyond reason, your specific worry about the specific thing is small, and its smallness is not an insult, it is a relief. The universe does not care about your worry. That is not cold comfort, it is real comfort. The universe is not judging, it is not keeping score. It is just there, enormous and largely dark, dotted with fires at incomprehensible distances, running on schedules that make the rise and fall of civilizations look like the flutter of an eyelid. And somewhere in that enormity, on a small planet orbiting an ordinary star in the outer reaches of one of hundreds of billions of galaxies, a very recent species of large-brained primates woke in the middle of the night and looked up and felt something that has no name in any language, but that everyone who has ever looked up at a truly dark sky in the middle of the night has felt. Something between smallness and belonging, between humility and wonder. You can have that feeling. You are entitled to it. It is your inheritance as a member of this species that has been waking in the middle of the night and looking up since long before it had words for what it was doing or why. You are the latest in the line, the most recent iteration of the middle of the night waker. And now, I think, it is time. The night has been well used. The mind has gone where it needed to go. The body has been patient and thorough and has done its necessary work in the dark. The second sleep is ready for you. It has been ready for a while. It is just waiting for you to let the words fade and the thoughts slow and the muscles release their last bit of daytime holding. Let go of Baghdad. Let go of Angkor. Let go of the mounds of Cahokia and the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe and the manuscripts of Timbuktu and the lighthouse at Alexandria and the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. Let them all settle back into the deep past that they inhabit. Let them be what they are, the evidence that you are not the first person to lie in the dark, in the middle of the night, and wonder about the size of things. Let your breath slow. Let the darkness be enough. Let the second sleep come. It is yours. It has always been yours. The night is almost done with what it needed to do, and so are you. Sleep now. Good night. There is one more thing I want to say, and then I will let you go. I have been talking all night about cities that fell, about sleep patterns that were disrupted, about knowledge that was lost, and there is a heaviness to that, a weight that accumulates over the course of a long night of historical reflection, the weight of impermanence, the weight of knowing that everything that human beings have built, everything we have been proud of and cared for and defended and passed on, has eventually been changed beyond recognition or lost entirely. But I have been slightly selective, and I owe you the correction. Not everything is lost. Some things persist with a tenacity that is almost miraculous. The Epic of Gilgamesh was written on clay tablets in Nineveh in the 7th century BCE, gathered from older oral traditions that stretched back another 1,000 years. It was buried in the rubble of the destroyed Assyrian library when Nineveh fell in 612 BCE. It lay in the ground for 2,500 years, until Austin Henry Layard's excavations in the 1840s brought it back to the surface. And when it was deciphered and translated, it was found to contain a flood story so similar to the biblical story of Noah that it caused a sensation when it was first presented to the Society of Biblical Archaeology in London in 1872, because it predated the biblical version by at least 1,000 years and suggested that the flood narrative was not unique to the Hebrew tradition, but was part of a much older Mesopotamian literary heritage. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest story we have. It is about grief and friendship and the search for meaning in the face of death. It is about a king who loses his best friend and is so destroyed by the loss that he sets out on a journey to the ends of the earth to find immortality and does not find it, and is told instead to go home and live the life he has, because that is what there is. This story was lost for 2,500 years, and now it is back, and people read it. And the grief of Gilgamesh for Enkidu is as recognizable and as real as any grief in any story written in the last century. The emotional truth persisted. The human experience it described persisted. Even when the text was buried in the ground, and the civilization that produced it was gone, and the language it was written in was dead, and there was no one left who could read it, it persisted. The Antikythera mechanism is a device found in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1900, recovered from the bottom of the sea, where it had been lying for approximately 2,000 years. When it was finally understood, after decades of careful analysis and eventually high-resolution X-ray scanning, it turned out to be an astronomical calculator of extraordinary sophistication, capable of predicting the positions of the sun and moon and planets, the cycles of lunar eclipses, and the dates of the ancient Greek Olympiads and other festivals. It is, in the judgment of the scientists who have studied it most carefully, not just out of place in its time, but impossibly advanced. A device that should not exist in 100 BCE by any reasonable estimate of the technological and mathematical knowledge of that period. It exists. It is in a museum in Athens. Its gears and dials and inscriptions have been read and understood. And what it tells us is that the ancient world was not a simple linear progression from primitive to sophisticated, but a complicated, non-linear process in which some achievements came early and were lost and had to be rediscovered, and some knowledge was more advanced than any reasonable reading of the historical record would predict. There are things we have lost that we have not yet found. There are achievements of the ancient world that we have not yet understood. There are stories in the ground and under the sea and in the archives of traditions that were marginalized by colonial scholarship that are still waiting to be recovered. The past is not closed, it is still opening, and the night is still the night. The specific night that you are in right now, the one we have been moving through together, is one night in a very long series of nights, each of them containing someone awake in the middle of it, each of them doing the work of the night, each of them ending with the second sleep and the dawn and the day that follows. You are part of that series, one night in the long chain. And what you have done with this night, the lying in the dark, and the letting the thoughts go where they went, and the patient waiting for the second sleep, that is not nothing. That is the thing itself. The living of a night, in the middle of which you were awake, and you were yourself, with all of your specific anxieties and griefs and questions, and the particular history of the specific day that preceded this specific night. You were here. That is not nothing. The baker Hamid was here. The scholar in the House of Wisdom was here. The monks of Lake Tana were here. Ibn Khaldun was here. Thinking about why things rise and fall. Writing one more sentence in the middle of the night before setting down his pen. You are here. And now, the second sleep is very close. I can feel it in the rhythm of these sentences. The way they are slowing. The way the thoughts are becoming less urgent and more ambient. The way the distance between one idea and the next is growing wider and more comfortable. Let the distance grow. Let the thoughts drift where they want to drift, which is downward, toward the deep water of the second sleep, toward the warm dark of it, toward the dreaming that will process what the night has left you with, and make it, by morning, into something you can carry. The cities are quiet now. Baghdad sleeps. The real Baghdad, the city as it is right now, in the 21st century. A city with a long and complicated and painful recent history that is still, in some fundamental way, a city of the river and the date palm and the ancient agricultural richness that the Tigris and the Euphrates created. It sleeps. The people in it sleep, in two parts, or one, in whatever pattern their specific bodies and specific nights allow. Angkor is quiet, in the dark before the tourists arrive. The stone faces watching nothing in particular. The forest pressing gently at the temple walls. The frogs calling in the moat. The mounds of Cahokia are dark humps in an Illinois field. The grass on them damp with dew. The Mississippi out of sight but present, moving south in the dark. The walls of Great Zimbabwe stand in the moonlight or the starlight, depending on the night, and a nightjar calls from somewhere in the valley below. Everything is at rest. The long human story is at rest. The long argument between civilization and impermanence is, for the moment, at rest. And you can rest too. The night has done what it needed to do. The thoughts have gone where they needed to go. The body has done its ancient work. The second sleep is here. Let it come. Let the darkness be enough. Let the night be what the night is, the oldest and most reliable companion that human beings have ever had. The one that was there before the first fire, before the first word, before the first city was built on a river and called home. The one that will be there when the last city has gone quiet and the stars turn in an empty sky over a world that is, even then, extraordinary. The night is here, and so are you. Good night. One last story, one last city. There is a place in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico called Chichen Itza. It was built by the Maya civilization, or more precisely, it was built over several centuries by successive waves of Maya culture, each adding to what the last had left behind. At its peak around 1000 CE, it was one of the largest cities in the pre-Columbian Americas, and its monuments are of the kind that make you stop and recalibrate your assumptions about what human beings in the pre-industrial world were capable of. The Temple of Kukulkan, also called El Castillo, is a pyramid built with astronomical precision, so specific that it could only have been achieved by centuries of careful observation. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, the afternoon sun hits the northwest corner of the pyramid and casts a series of triangular shadows along the northern staircase, creating the illusion of a serpent, Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity, descending the steps. This effect lasts for approximately 34 minutes before the sun angle changes and the serpent disappears. To build this effect into the pyramid required knowing, with precision, the exact angle of the equinox sun. It required planning the pyramid's orientation and proportions to create this specific shadow pattern. It required coordination across generations, because you cannot test the equinox effect until the equinox comes, once a year, and if the proportions are slightly wrong, you will not know until the pyramid is already built. The Maya astronomers who designed this were watching the sky for generations. They were tracking the movements of Venus with a precision that rivals modern astronomical records for that period. They had a calendrical system of extraordinary sophistication, a long count calendar that tracked time in cycles of millions of years, and that could be used to date events to within a single day across spans of time that dwarf all of recorded history. They understood time, not just the practical time of planting and harvesting, but the cosmic time of planetary cycles and solar alignments, and the slow precession of the equinoxes. They understood that time was larger than any human lifetime, larger than any civilization, larger than anything that could be built, and they built the pyramid anyway, knowing it would outlast them, knowing the serpent would still descend the steps on the equinox, long after the civilization that built it had changed beyond recognition, knowing that the sky would keep its appointments, even when no one was left who knew what the appointment was for. This is an act of extraordinary faith. Not faith in a god, exactly, though that was also part of it. Faith in time itself, faith in the reliability of the universe, faith that the sun would come back, that the equinox would come back, that whatever came after them would still have eyes to see the shadow serpent descending the steps. And they were right. The equinox still comes, the shadow still falls, the serpent still descends, twice a year at Chichen Itza, as it has for 1,000 years, as it will continue to do for as long as the pyramid stands and the sun remains in its orbit. This is what the night teaches, if you let it teach, that the large rhythms, the ones that are older than any civilization, keep their appointments. The sun rises, the moon turns through its phases. The seasons come and go, the equinox arrives when it arrives, and the shadow falls where it falls, and the universe does not require your permission or your presence or your understanding. It just does what it does. And in the middle of the night, when the daylight tasks have released their grip, and the mind has gone soft, and the body is doing its patient, unremarkable work, you can feel this more clearly than at any other time. The sense that you are part of something larger than the specific day, larger than the specific worry, larger than the specific version of the world that you have been given to live in. Not that your specific version does not matter, it matters enormously. To you, and to the people you are connected to, and to the small piece of the world that is affected by what you do with your days. It matters, but it is also small, in the way that all specific things are small when held against the backdrop of the very large. And the smallness, held correctly, is a kind of freedom. You do not have to hold the whole thing, you just have to hold your peace. The Maya astronomers held their peace. The scholars of Baghdad held their peace. The stone wall builders of Great Zimbabwe held their peace. The monks of Lake Tana held and are holding their peace. Everyone who has ever woken in the middle of the night and lay in the dark and thought and eventually slept again held their peace. You are holding yours, right now, in the middle of this night. It is enough. Sleep now. The sun will rise. It always does. And the night, the beautiful and ancient and patient night, will make way for it, as it always has. You are in good hands. Good night. There is one more thing the night wants you to know. Sleep researchers have found that when people lie awake in the middle of the night, but do not check the time, they estimate that they have been awake for far longer than they actually have. 15 minutes feels like an hour feels like most of the night. This is the particular distortion of the middle waking, the way time stretches in the dark when there is nothing to measure it by except the circling of the mind. This is why clocks are not your friend at this hour. If you look at the clock and see that it is 3 in the morning and you have to be up at 6, the calculation begins. 3 hours. Only 3 hours. I need to be asleep right now. And the need to be asleep right now guarantees that you will not be asleep right now, because sleep cannot be forced by urgency. Sleep retreats from urgency. It comes only when the mind releases the insistence. The people who slept in 2 parts in the pre-industrial world did not have alarm clocks. They had roosters, sometimes. They had the call to prayer if they lived in a city with a mosque. They had the church bell if they lived in a medieval European village. They had the particular quality of the light as it changed from deep black to the blue of pre-dawn. And these cues were approximate, not precise. They did not produce anxiety about the exact number of remaining sleep minutes. They produced a general sense of where in the night one was, and that general sense was enough. If you do not know what time it is, you do not know how much time you have left. And if you do not know how much time you have left, you cannot calculate your way into insomnia. The middle waking just is what it is, a time of wakefulness in the dark, of unknown duration, with no particular claim on what you do with it. This is, improbably, a gift. The not knowing is a gift. You can use it. You can let the hour be undetermined. You can let the thoughts run without counting them. You can be here, in the dark, in this particular nowhere time that is the middle of the night, and let it be its own thing without measurement. The ancients had a word for this kind of time. The Greeks distinguished between chronos, measured time, the time of clocks and calendars and schedules, and kairos, the right time, the opportune moment, the time that is defined not by quantity, but by quality. The middle of the night is kairos time. It is not measurable in any meaningful way. It is simply the time that it is, with the specific quality that it has, offering what it offers. And what it offers, as we have been discovering together all night, is not nothing. It is something quite specific and quite valuable, a quality of attention, an honesty of thought, a biological state that your body uses for particular purposes that cannot be accomplished any other time, a connection through the long thread of human experience to everyone who has ever woken in the middle of the night, in the middle of a civilization, and wondered about the size of things. Take the gift. Let the kairos be what it is. And then, when it has done what it needs to do, let it release you into the second sleep, which is not something you manufacture or force or earn, but something that arrives when the time is right, the way rain arrives, the way morning arrives, the way all the things that cannot be controlled but can only be received eventually arrive if you are patient enough and still enough to receive them. You have been still enough. You have been patient enough. The second sleep is here. Good night.